The opinions expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
We begin episode 37 on this Saturday evening, March 13th, 2021, on a reflective note. March 11th, 2011, at 2:46 p.m. Japan time. A 9.1 magnitude earthquake hit off the coast of the Tohoku region in northeast Japan. It was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded there, and unfortunately, it was the first in a trio of disasters, the effects of which are still felt today, with the resulting tsunami and the meltdown of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Of course, if you kept up with some of the news this week, you would have noted many of the stories in Japan that would have commemorated the tragedy, which was confirmed to have killed almost 16,000 people, with more than 2,500 unaccounted for. Many of those stories, of course, were about the people who lost loved ones in the disasters, and how many of them are managing 10 years later. On top of that, you're also seeing stories about lessons from then and these days on at least public broadcasters like NHK World. You'll see shows and features on disaster preparedness. I wanted to start this week's episode with our own thoughts 10 years later. Where were you? And what was running through your mind at the time? Who wants to go first? Or should I go first? I remember 10 years ago, I was in the process of falling asleep. I know I was up late that night, which is quite often I'm up late. And then I think as I fell asleep, the first notice I got of the earthquake was actually a Facebook post put up by Ron Manziak, the host of, I forgot what his podcast was called. I think it was called it was a Japan related podcast he had at the time. I forgot what he does these days. I think he's repurposed it recently. His post on it was the first mention I saw of the earthquake, but at the time I didn't know how serious it was about to get. And then I don't know at what point during the night I found out it was serious. And I know waking up and turning on NHK World that morning, I knew how serious it was. I don't know where I started to get that sense, though, if it was listening to like something like 680 News or turning on NHK World, which the app by that point had started to exist. And it started off a long month on NHK World of coverage, the likes of which I hadn't seen to that point and haven't seen since. Basically, they did a cycle of 30 minutes English language news broadcasting, and then the other 30 minutes of NHK domestic Japanese language programming. And it also touched off obviously a wave of support from many of us here in the fandom and just generally speaking around the world. I remember Anime News Network even posting up a link to NHK World as well. And cable operators like Rogers, I don't think Bell had it at the time, but Rogers made TV Japan free for a few months as well, in case people want to keep up with the news through that means. That's the international channel that's run by NHK and a consortium of Japanese broadcasters. I think Microsoft may actually have a stake in it too. But that's my memory, and basically all programming was at a standstill for a few months there. And At the risk of sounding a bit repetitive, because I know I told this story in the lone recording that ended version 1 back in 2012, almost a year after that earthquake. I told the story of Gene Otani, who was the NHK World news anchor on duty at the time of the earthquake. And he came on at 3 p.m. local time there and called it live as the tsunami started to weave or envelop its way through that part of the Tohoku region. And reading up a little later on, I learned that Mr. Otani, this wasn't the first time that he had done coverage of a major earthquake. And actually, he may have made his name covering the other one that had happened in recent years there, which was the 1995 Great Hanshin earthquake. He worked at a radio station there as a temp, and after experiencing the earthquake and helping people in the immediate aftermath, he broadcasted for 50 straight hours information in English, I believe. Won an award for that, and his broadcasting career really started to take off from that point. And since then, he's taken on various broadcasting jobs in Japan, briefly worked with Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio, and then returned back to Japanese airwaves, where to his current position with NHK World. And that's where he stands today as I believe, their lead business editor during their newscasts now. And in some interviews, and I know that NHK World won a few accolades for the way they covered that. In interviews since, Gene Otani has stated he didn't have time to think about his first experience in 1995 while covering things in 2011. He just soldiered through. And I think that's the experience of 1995 talking right there. So that's the story that I could at least remember from that day. I can safely say I was awake when the 10 years by the minute passed on what's to us Thursday morning, 12:46 a.m. Toronto time. That's the time difference. So I did watch some of the coverage, the 10th actual live 10th anniversary coverage, which culminated in a moment of silence throughout Japan and at a national memorial, which was attended by the Prime Minister and the Emperor and Empress. And I know that NHK World dedicated a whole hour to that and some feature reports looking back on it. But I guess those are my random memories that I can think of right now in talking about the events of the Great East Japan earthquake. Okay. Does anyone else want to say anything? Or anyone else have a thought to offer about from that time?
One thing I will say is that I remember in the 2 or 3 or 4 years after the earthquake, I would start to notice that there would be multiple movies coming up from Japan using the aftermath of the earthquake as the setting for their film. And I've talked about the movie that I will talk about in the past on this podcast, but there was a movie called My Man that is the one that always sticks in my mind, because while they used the earthquake and tsunami as the backdrop of the situation that the characters were in, the movie actually takes a very dark turn, in the sense that you have two blood relatives who have no one to turn to but each other, and their relationship takes a sharp turn towards the incestuous route. And I remember being kind of disturbed throughout that movie, because there were certain scenes that were very unsettling. And I had one friend that I took to go see this movie with, and his first words to me were, "What the fuck, Kevin?" And I couldn't help but laugh. But the point of what I'm talking about here is that you can see the impact that the earthquake made to the people, and the number of films that came out during that time period were definitely in the minds of those people while they were, directing or storyboarding or screenwriting those films. And I wish I saw more films with the earthquake as a backdrop, because sometimes I would wonder, like, oh, what was in their mind while they were making these films? Like, it made me wonder how they were impacted. Just something to think about on my end.
Well, when you bring that up, it kind of brought to mind the reason why Your Name became such a hit a few years later. Because that story centers around a major disaster that happens in a little town. And many people, I think Shinkai himself has stated that 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 plot point, that disaster, I think resonated with a lot of viewers because of the disaster. So I thought that's a fair point.
Or
And
that people thought he was taking advantage of it, which he said he obviously was not, and stuff like that. So it's this weird
well,
double-edged sword, right?
I think that's, see, the thing is, then get in line. That's like trying to point a finger at Apple for their for their bad factory practices at the Foxconn factories. But then again, Foxconn makes stuff for a lot of other companies as well.
Or we could say all the mining for all the precious materials we need for our electronics as well, right?
Mm-hmm. So, and I don't think, like, I have trouble with that argument personally, to say that Shinkai was exploiting that,
Or
because that's,
others and stuff like that
yeah,
in that
well,
point too.
sometimes that's a coping mechanism to be able to tell a story, maybe a fictional story. I mean, one of the stories that kind of resonated to me, and it had really this kind of doesn't really have much to do with the earthquake itself. Ruth Ozeki's hit novel, A Tale for the Time Being, is kind of set up by the earthquake as well. And she admitted that she actually kind of pivoted her story to kind of incorporate the events of the earthquake into it. Really, the story itself has nothing to do with it. It's just she just repurposed that event as the catalyst for the chain of events in her story. But I don't know. I have, as I said, I have trouble with that argument to say,
But when you have something as big of an event as this, obviously it's going to affect many people making their film, literature, what have you. We've seen it after 9/11 and many other big events in the 20th century and stuff like that. So it's not alone.
No, not in that sense. As I said, that's like blaming Apple for everything that happens at Foxconn, right?
Hmm.
And
I
to James' statement just a second ago, I think that a lot of people, especially here on this side of the world, so in North America, I think that the gravity of this earthquake is often lost on us, at least as a general sort of culture. This was a completely devastating tragedy that changed, the entire country up until very much the present. If you look at Japan Sinks just last year, with the media still resonating of this tragedy that occurred. And as you mentioned right at the beginning, like it wasn't just an earthquake, it was an earthquake, a tsunami, a nuclear fallout. There was so much that happened there. So I think that it's difficult for us to realize again just the gravity of everything that happened. When it took place, it was 2011, so I think I was probably a senior advisor at the Anime Club, which is the genesis of this podcast in some ways, Yama. And I
Which we
remember there,
mentioned last week. Yeah, don't worry about that.
yeah.
Don't worry. We mentioned it last week,
and
James and I.
and I think that there was a discussion there, like do we try to raise money, like what do we do, should this be left to the Japanese language club at the university, we're the nerd club, what should we do? And to be honest, I don't remember what the choice or what our answer to that was, but it was this very weird thing to watch from so far away. And this would have also been several months to a year before I went off to live in Costa Rica, which very quickly led to me living in Japan for a year. And to be honest, like that wasn't a huge, like it didn't really factor in by that point. So by 2012, despite the length of this tragedy, I think maybe I had a couple thoughts or a few friends shared concern about radiation and that, but it my love and interest for the country and culture and the potential of living and learning and working there, it wasn't hindered by the disaster. And throughout all these stories, I'm sure we've all seen the country of Japan and the people, show incredible strength and perseverance as well.
I give them credit, actually.
Yeah, it's like I was thinking, Geoff, on some of the thoughts you said there, and I think my brother Matthew went on vacation with a few people after that, like a year after in that, and people were still worried about going to Japan, and people were gracious that they were there to visit them. Like I know the one traditional inn, and I think it was a traditional inn and hot springs and stuff like that, but I can't remember if it was on their journey to Osaka and stuff like that, but they were basically the only people there and they were treated like kings and people were just so gracious that they were willing to come to Japan and be there and learn and be respectful and stuff like that because it really was affecting them and stuff like that. And then the other thing, as we say as well, is that this event, like it was the earthquake, as we said, the tsunami, and then the nuclear disaster. Like for all those three to happen is just incredible in its own. But Mother Nature can take us on at any time. It's like, and we're never going to win. And that's something we all should take a lesson from, especially the tsunami and the earthquake, because Japan, we know how prepared they are for those type of disasters. And you know what? We'll never be the best, but we'll try our best. And the West Coast definitely needs to learn from that. California is okay, but definitely Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and obviously BC need to look up because they've always been talking about the big one, right?
Yeah,
And it might not happen in our lifetime. It might happen tomorrow, but we're not as prepared as we think. We're definitely not as prepared as Japan was. You know what I mean? And it's
absolutely.
something we seriously have to think about because we look at all those lives lost, and that was them being prepared. Just imagine for us how hard it would hit us. And we won't be able to save everyone, but every life counts, right? And I hope we always learn from these type of events.
Well, further to your point, James, though, no matter how hard you try to be prepared, no matter how much you think you're prepared, there's always going to be a shortcoming when these things happen. And we always have to re-examine that regardless. As I said,
It's a
something will
continuous
always,
process, right? Yeah, as I
it's
said,
no, it's
it's
cyclical,
never
it's
going to be
continuous.
perfect, but it's something we always got to think about.
Well, just look at how our country handled COVID-19.
Exactly. That's where we are now.
I just feel like as a society and as a nation, the people who see these possible risks are never the ones who can ultimately make the big decisions. Call me jaded if you wish, but
They don't want to spend the money or something like that, or they spend it
mhm,
in a way that doesn't actually have tangible benefit and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And then the problem is once something does hit, then they ask the questions and it's like, well, where were some of you people before, right?
And I think there's also, unfortunately, like, and I hate to sort of bring this up, but I think that part of it with both the earthquake and with COVID, there's no human enemy to fight. So especially the states, but the rest of the world as well. There's not that kind of very fast action and desperation that you'd see in wartime or after a terrorist attack. It's this like, oh, it's just nature, or oh, it's just a virus. It's kind of sad, but if you look at the devastation,
I mean,
natural causes can cause.
but it could be, right? I mean, if a nation is hit with something so horrific, depends on how quick the nation can bounce back from it, right? I mean, look at how fast China bounced back from COVID, right? I mean, preparedness is one thing, but afterthought and organization and just being a more capable nation is more important, right?
And remember, though, as we say, right, Mo, it's like we live in a democracy, and then they, of course, live in a very different system, right? Like if you have a strong man leading your country, obviously you're going to have a more singular focus than for us.
and if you don't take human rights into consideration as often,
And you look at, as you say, that you look at the numbers and stuff, and you're willing to accept certain deaths and certain things, right, that we will not accept and we won't give up on.
Damn straight.
And even though, as we said, we're imperfect and it's an imperfect system, we do try our best. And democracy has always evolved. And hopefully we can get better, right? It takes all of us. We
Yeah,
can't just
fingers
jump
crossed.
out of the boat, right? Because if we jump out of the boat, who's going to help us row this boat?
yep,
Exactly.
100%, James. Like I know people who complain about civic matters, and then I ask if they vote, and they tell me no, and then I say, well, you have no right to complain.
But I mean, voting doesn't really do anything. Come on, guys.
Well, at least add your name to the pile.
Ah,
And don't forget, and do not forget the winner and still champions and always champions, science and Mother Nature.
But
It's
go
And
ahead, Geoff.
I was just gonna say, like, speaking, like, just with the Mother Nature thing, and earlier in this discussion, you mentioned about the fact that I think it was James that this could happen at any time. Like this it could happen tomorrow. It could happen 500 years from now. And where I was living in Japan, Kagoshima, there is a giant volcano there that erupted 800 times a year. Just the ash, but it's due for another huge explosion. The island the volcano is on is created the last time the volcano erupted. And it's this weird, trade-off there where it's one of the lowest likelihoods for earthquakes in the country, and down in the south there. But there's this, potentially devastating supervolcano, not maybe a supervolcano, but one that could create an island, sort of right in the bay there. That's the symbol of the prefecture. So, that was, even though earthquakes were never really on my mind, the idea of preparedness and, what would happen if the volcano erupted, that was kind of always in the back of my mind because I couldn't really ignore the giant cloud that hovered over the city every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I was going to give a final thought since we had many different memorials and different things. And there was one I was watching on YouTube. It was from a Canadian, he lives in Japan, stuff like that. And he's a very good vlogger in Japan. It's called Tokyo Lens. And so he did a video in northern Japan in a place called Unasumai, and this town, and he talked to a high school student, an inn owner, and then a fisherman, and it's like their stories. And the inn owner was interesting because she said this year, 2021, 3/11, after that, she was going to stop telling her story and stuff like that. Because a lot of these people have been telling their stories for so long. She says, I'm going to live my life after that. But the story and what he showed, it was just so powerful and stuff like that about them trying to get up this mountain and stuff like that and thinking they're safe, and they still have to go more and stuff like that because it was just the tsunami was so large and stuff like that. And then they were worried about even as it receded. But the other thing was they were in a part where it was colder during the night. So some of them, they would go back to the inn and stuff like that and still worry about the tsunami because it's like, do we stay outside and we're going to freeze to death, or do we go in
Mm.
and worry about the tsunami? And then there was the other thing, they showed what it was before and then what it was after. And they have so many empty plots and a lot of these places and stuff like that because some people obviously have not returned or some people have unfortunately passed on, and it's just like this mishmash. But they've also transferred and learned things because their junior high and their elementary school were closer, and it was one of the strongest buildings. It got washed away. So when they rebuilt, they built it higher up the mountain. And it's kind of like if this happens again, it's going to be their evacuation center, and it's even more fortified and stuff like that. So you can prepare as much as you want, but they've definitely learned lessons and stuff like that. And they talked about the harrowingness and the panic. And the thing that they also said was they had no time to think. They weren't thinking about loved ones, as the one junior high girl said. She was thinking, I just want to be alive. I'm hoping to be alive, as they're running up these paths and these roadways and stuff like that. And some of it, they did have video footage of people trying to get people and saying, you got to get going, you got to get going and worry about the tsunami and stuff like that, because some people were forgetting that factor. They were worried about the earthquake, right? Because they were
Mm-hmm.
they were getting out of the buildings, they were going in to the more open ground. But some of them were saying, we got to get going. There's going to be a tsunami. And even the fisherman said he knew immediately because all the water in the harbor just receded. And then probably 15, 20 minutes later, the wave comes, right?
And
Yeah.
earthquakes and tsunamis are common enough that I'm sure some people, at that time, you're not watching the news or looking into the future. No one knew how bad it would be at that point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they admitted that as well. They said, until it hits you, you don't realize and stuff like that. But that one was from, it's on YouTube. It's Tokyo Lens is the channel, and they did a great look at that. There's two videos. One is looking at those three people, and then they have one in-depth one with the innkeeper. She that story she's never going to tell again and stuff like that. She said
Mm-hmm.
she's only told for 10 years, and now she's going to begin anew and stuff like that. And I think that's what many other people are going to do, because you can't just keep on living this over and over, right?
Right. I guess I'll end the talk on the earthquake by, like you talked about the people. The only thought that comes to my mind is what we've seen since, and not necessarily in terms of consequences. It's just the general feel of something like what you see. I mean, we kind of hit on it in terms of Japan sinks 2020, although that's a story that from even further back. But its timing and the way it would resonate is perfect. I think in the 10 years since, and don't get me wrong, I think there's always been a preoccupation with mortality in Japan. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like there's been at least an acknowledgement of mortality there. But in the 10 years since the disaster, there's been an increased focus on it in terms of some of the stuff I've seen. And when I say that, yeah, I'm kind of saying that on the guise of somebody who watches NHK World regularly, and take that with a grain of salt. But because of that, I've started to notice this talk about Japan's aging society and how we deal with death, and stories about doctors who work in palliative care. So, and of course, the impending disasters that could happen with climate change and all these other little, end of days type concerns. There's just been a bigger focus on all that. And I think it's just given a pause for thought to Japan there as a whole. But as I said, it's through the guise of NHK, and we've had that discussion before. But 10 years on, and that's where we are. The region has been slowly rebuilding. Mind you, it's not without its own hiccups. My understanding is a lot of the workers who have been working much of those 10 years at Fukushima Daiichi have grown ill, as people might have expected. And there's talk that a lot of them aren't getting the type of support they really need. Of course, in some regions that are rebuilding, one of the feature stories I saw on NHK World during the coverage was of a woman who lost her husband to the tsunami. And she pointed out the exact spot where they found his body, and how she feels now that that exact spot has been rebuilt and has become a street, and the mixed feelings she has over that. And as I said, this is just one of those times of reflection, and what could you do differently now, should the next time come? And yeah, and one of the other things, and this is the last thing, on services like NHK World, on their app, and of course in their programming, you will notice now that you will see alerts whenever earthquakes and tsunami warnings are given. So essentially, it becomes a version of the emergency alerts that we sometimes see here in Ontario. And I guess those are the key points in the lessons. And what can we do in the future? 10 years on, and all you just can do is move forward. Okay, moving on. And as I said, this is all reflection. There's another thing we also want to talk about, and this is a little closer to home. We also have an update to a story that we mentioned all the way back in the return episodes of this podcast. That story is the Yonge Street Van Attack, as we like to call it here in Toronto. I think through much of the rest of the world, it's just referred to as the Toronto Van Attack. And the update was a couple weeks ago, a little over a week ago, way back on March 3rd, the perpetrator of that attack was found criminally responsible on all counts when he drove a rented van down a sidewalk on Yonge Street in the north end of Toronto. And he was found guilty on all counts, which is 10 counts of first-degree murder and 16 counts of attempted murder. James and I think, hinted we would at least bring it up in this recording. Kevin was with us when we first talked about it, and that was the only time we've talked about it. And we did promise that we'd talk about it a little more when there was some sort of conclusion to it. And with the guilty verdicts, obviously there is, although of course closure to the victims is another story, and we have to acknowledge that. Just the upshot of the case itself, there was no dispute over who the perpetrator was and the fact that he drove the van, but the trial specifically was about, was he criminally responsible? Did he know what he was doing?
His
And
mental state in that, yeah.
his mental state, a key point or key crux in the defense case was the use of, what's the pardon me, was the use of autism. Sorry.
I
Yeah.
know they talked about his autism and stuff like that, and there was a lot of debate on that, especially from the community, the autism community, and how they felt it could damage them and stuff like that. And we've heard that from many different cases where mental state has been put at the key function of that. And as we know, it's like they try to exhaust everything. And some of the defense team, it's like many of these high profiles where we know this is definitely the person that did it. They go through the motions and stuff like that. Also, maybe they don't believe that obviously this person is guilty, but they're trying to represent their client and make sure they do their job, that they're given the fairest legal defense so that nothing slips through and then they're somehow either acquitted or something is overturned or something to that effect. You know what I mean?
This is
So,
just it's a case of,
and
like,
it's
the
very tough
trial
for
was a
the
case of due
victims
diligence.
and all of that too, right? And as we said, it continues on even after the trial and stuff like that. And they've admitted that. They said, we're happy that this verdict has come out and stuff like that. It doesn't bring back our family members if they are deceased, but we're still going to have to live with this and move forward. And they still have to an extent, because remember, in this type of case, what the verdicts meant is he's life behind bars. And for us in Canada, that means 25 years, and then he has a chance at parole and stuff like that. And
Mm-hmm.
some people I know have their quibbles about that and stuff like that, but that is how it works here in Canada. There is no death penalty. Yes, a criminal, if they're considered a dangerous offender, like for example, I don't want to even say names now, but if they're considered a dangerous offender, then that 25 years, the parole part is non-negotiable. They don't even get that. They're just in jail for life and stuff like that. But in this case, it seems like it's going to be the standard one where it's life in prison. 25 years is the first chance he'll probably get a chance at parole, but the likelihood he's going to get that is nil, I think. Nil. But it's
Mm-hmm.
still something of a pain point for families too, right? And you
Yeah,
feel that. And
there's
it's that tough thing too, because we're trying to be a just society and no one can ever say what that means. And we've always had that discussion too over the death penalty way back when, right? And I know they have that in some parts of the States now and other places in the world that still have it.
yeah. I mean, it's the death penalty is always one of those, you better be sure about using it because there's no walking it back once it is, for
And,
obvious reasons.
and we've seen where it just goes wrong again and again in the States and stuff. People that should not be on death row. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I think, in my personal opinion, you should not have the death penalty because it's the final straw. It's the final straw. You can't walk it back, as you said. It's like, that's why I think at the moment, the way our punishments are set to a degree are fine, but we still have to refine it again and again and again
No, it's
depending
continuing.
on what are crimes and what we consider crimes now and stuff like that. It's just never ending.
Well,
And
if we resign ourselves to the fact that this is a continuous thing, then I think we're okay.
mhm.
That type of stuff. And remember, we've had this discussion on this show before about the death penalty because we brought it up when those 13 members of Aum Shinrikyo were given their death punishments for the sarin gas attacks in the mid 90s.
And we know how long that took to do and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the other thing we can say, and I'm sure the solace some people can take, is the justice system functioned as it should, especially under trying times, as we know, with COVID-19 and the restrictions they're under, because
Yeah,
there are no jury trials
this wasn't a jury
in
trial, just
Ontario.
for reference.
Sorry,
This was, yeah, and just to the listeners, this was not a jury
it
trial.
was a judge only.
It was a judge only. And actually, James already starts to bring up some interesting points because the verdict was broadcast live on a live YouTube stream, and since then it hasn't been made available any further. It was meant to be just a one-time thing, and that's as
Based
per
on law and stuff
Canadian
like that,
law
and
here.
they mention that and stuff like that. When they showed things in the papers and different things like that, they did it like they were in the courtroom with the sketches and stuff like that. And the Supreme Court mentioned to people again, you cannot restream this, you cannot use live things like that is all illegal. Like it's specific. But
Hmm.
in regards to this, it's incredible to think this YouTube stream for the verdict, 6,000 people turned in, and they joked, they said 120 courtrooms filled to capacity would be what it would take to do those 6,000 people. So it's just,
6,000?
yeah,
Oh,
6,000,
600? Really?
6,000, 6,000 people tuned in to that verdict on YouTube, on the
Wow.
website.
Wow.
That's,
Okay.
that's crazy when you think about it. And they talked about, of course, that the defense team, and I'm sure some other people, they talked about this trial saying it was a 6 week judge alone trial. So now you never know. It could have been judge alone if we had been pre COVID times. It could have been jury if they find the right jurors and stuff like that. But judge alone trial, it was 6 weeks. So it was from in December, they finished up with that. And then the other thing was that the attorneys from both the Crown and Defense basically they said that it was through Zoom that they had people from the media and stuff like that going to watch this trial and stuff like that. And that they only allowed certain people into the actual room itself. So you had the judge, you had the court recorder, you had the attorneys, which is the defense and the Crown, and then we also had the actual accused themselves, and we had, as I said, court reporter and register. So there weren't that many people, and then anyone else, they were through that Zoom, and somehow through this high-profile trial, they were able to get everyone basically through it and stuff like that. And then for witnesses, they had them in a separate room, spaced on stuff like that. And I'm not sure if they did that through Zoom or if they then brought them over to that secluded area and stuff like that when it was time for their testimony and stuff like that. But through all the craziness, they somehow got this done in 6 weeks and they got a trial and an outcome that was expected probably, but that there wasn't anything that says something's wrong. I'm going to appeal it on this
Yeah.
reason and stuff like that because we've done something wrong. They still managed to get it right. And I think the justice system overall has been able, if they can handle this high profile, they've been able to hopefully handle most of the other cases of just as important throughout this pandemic and stuff like
Hmm.
that for other people.
Yeah. And well, when I look back on the trial itself, as I said, the autism was used as the main defense, and I think people are quite disturbed about the use of that, and people wonder about the ramifications, and I suppose that's another debate later on. We will put a link up to the CTV report of the guilty verdict, and in it you will see an interview with somebody and this is probably journalism 101 you're going to see here. You're going to see an interview with somebody with autism who unfortunately also lost a friend in the attack, because for this guy had an elementary school classmate who was one of the victims. So as I said, that's classic journalism 101, I think, right there. Okay, a quick tie into the subject matter of this show, and I think of two things. One, that stretch of Yonge Street we've stated before has become a very Asian foodie centric area. Kevin has mentioned as much, right?
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Mhm.
I would say with Willowdale and that stretch of Yonge being so diverse, you just have a lot of different things there. I would
For what?
say it might lean more Asian nowadays, well, because Young and Finch, that stretch is considered like the new Koreatown, so to speak, of Toronto,
Mhm.
and you have an influx of Chinese people that live there now. So that's why some businesses have opened up to cater to their tastes.
Yes,
But
and I
I
think
would still say there's a good variety there.
yeah,
There's
there
a
still is. I think
significant Iranian population as well
yes,
in that region.
what came to mind as well when I remember last seeing the areas too, in a bygone era, I'm afraid. So yeah, and then that's one point. It is, and coming back to some of the stories that were in Pure Invention, it is home to some of the more famous karaoke clubs in the city. Twister, I think, being probably the most famous.
The grungy one a couple doors down, Young Karaoke, if it's still there, was the one of the main Yama haunts
I do
Mhm.
for all
remember
of
that as
the
well. Yeah.
karaoke events. It has I mean, a lot of those on that strip have a fairly nice selection of Japanese songs. Of course, because of the high Korean population there, I'd say that's the main the main clientele, but fairly good selection of Japanese and English, some other language songs as well. So I think that region, was definitely, very known to me before the attack. I worked about 10 minutes drive from there. I currently and did at the time I live. I think I'm technically in Willowdale. I'm just at, Bayview and Shepherd area, so I'm 20-minute walk away. So, it literally hit close to home. Thankfully, I didn't know any of the victims, but it definitely is a region that I'm very familiar with. I walk, through that area all the time, and it's very surreal, because I have friends there. I live and work. I used to work fairly close. There is a Latin American festival every year pre-COVID at that square there. Um, and it's so weird to walk through this area because I didn't visit there, within a couple weeks of the attack. So I think the first time I visited, even the memorial was kind of on its last couple days,
Hmm.
and it's such a it's relatively busy, but not downtown like Toronto busy. Um, so I wouldn't, because I was gonna say it's peaceful, but it's not it's not a boisterous area. Like you'd never expect. I mean, they say this about every tragedy, but you would never expect anything like that to happen there. Um, versus like if I was thinking outside the Eaton Center, yeah, it's a big boisterous area. Something could happen. Like, God forbid anything did, but North Toronto, like it's still so surreal and so weird that this happened there.
Yeah. Well, two things there. Remember, there was the Eaton Center shooting, I think
Yeah,
in
that's true.
2012, I believe.
Yeah.
And remember when we had old Mohamed Abdul Hadi, when he did the show a couple of years ago, he kind of basically voiced what you said, Geoff. And he's been through zones. He's been through war zones himself. If you remember that episode, but he had trouble wrapping his mind around the fact something like that happened, and he has family there. His his sister and mother live in that area now, and he had trouble visualizing that such a thing could have happened when he saw the area. And frankly, so did I. And once again, we'll note one more time that Yonge Street it's it's not bustling, but it's not really quiet either. And it's a fascinating street, that stretch, to me, because the sidewalks are so wide and the road is so wide. There's a interesting coexistence between the pedestrians and the drivers
And
along
that's what
Yonge
I
Street.
was thinking too. Like
It is
of
such
any
a fascinating stretch for that reason.
of any stretch, it's the widest sidewalks and stuff like that. Because I think I mentioned it last time we talked about this. Is you have Mel Lastman Square, so you get more pedestrian people that could go along there, and then the sidewalks are just so large going up that part of Yonge. And I remember being in one of the buildings, and we'd go out to lunch and go across. So sometimes at certain parts, you have maybe more people on the sidewalks than others, but you could fit a lot more people on there than in downtown Toronto, Yonge Street on those sidewalks, which feels so
Mhm.
small by comparison.
Yeah.
So it's just, and as you said, it gives it, I guess, that quiet vibe compared to the bustle of downtown. So it's so just hard to imagine, right?
Unfortunately, the sidewalks are wide enough for a van to drive through too, and unfortunately, that's a big part of the story. The other thing that we can use to that I want to use to tie into the whole things we've talked about in past episodes is, remember, the perpetrator was said to have been active in incel groups, and we've had these long discussions already on this show about message boards and 2chan and 4chan, and I guess there's a tie-in there, although some of that is a little blurry to me at this point. But the perpetrator might have been, at least on such boards himself. I mean, there is that community, and in the aftermath of the attack 3 years ago, we had this discussion about that community. A really sad discussion, but we have to acknowledge that sometimes that's there, and it's had its fingerprints on such attacks in recent years.
Yeah,
There really isn't too much else. I don't know. Is there anything else to add? I can't say there isn't too much else to add, because
and that's the thing that's the saddest, right? Like, it's like
yeah,
if
there's
even if they are in their right mind, that these type of communities they can do good, but they can also be the flip of the coin and influence to do something like this, right?
mhm.
And that's the tough thing that I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people fighting to figure out a way to get people on the right tracks. You know what I mean? And keep them from either being influenced or to stop these type of messages from going out. And we've heard about them talking about it in other different instances, whether it be politically or these other hate groups, right? On Facebook, on Twitter, everywhere online. And it feels like a game of whack-a-mole, but we got to find a way.
Yeah, well, the whack-a-mole thing is probably an apt way to start to end our talk on this, because we could talk about this on end. We've talked about it before, and maybe that's another, like, we can take some time to revisit that at some other point, and hopefully it won't be if something like this happens again, right? Anyway, the judge in this case, a Superior Court Justice Anne Malloy, in rendering her ruling, she had expressed the hope that media outlets in the future do not mention the perpetrator by name, and to respect her wishes, this show will not mention the perpetrator by name. Now, the article we'll put up will mention the perpetrator's name, but we made it a point back then not to mention the perpetrator's name, and we will do so now as well. However, to end off this segment, we will mention these names: Munir Najjar, Chulmin Kang, Anne-Marie D'Amico, Dorothy Sewell, Beautis Amarasinga, Mary Elizabeth Forsyth, Sohee Chung, Andrea Braden, Geraldine Brady, and Ji-Hoon Kim. These are the 10 victims who lost their lives. And as time goes, these are the names we hope that are remembered when looking back on that tough day in April 2018. Okay, let's take the break and lighten it up. When we return, we'll actually start talking about some of the headlines of the last couple weeks, and maybe look back and see what the others have to say on 15 years of the Anime Roundtable. The bullets are coming up next when we return on the Six Talk Podcast Network. And the Anime Roundtable now continues once again on this Saturday evening, March the 13th, 2021, for episode 37 of the version 2 era. Mike Nicolas, James Austin, Kevin Ng, Mohamed Sharmarke, and Geoff Greig continuing the conversation with you. In front of a virtual audience, thank you for listening, and online via the Six Talk Podcast Network, official podcast Anime North. Once again, we're continuing as we begin the bullets. These are little things which may become big things, and we got a lot of time to spare and a lot of bullets in the chamber to mention here. Or maybe before we start, and I guess we do a slight reflection, but maybe more on a happier note. James and I did do a Space Heater chat to commemorate the 15th anniversary of the first episode of this podcast. I know you guys may have listened to it. I don't know if you've listened to it fully. Do you guys have thoughts? Mo, Kevin, Geoff, do you guys have thoughts on the 15th anniversary?
I listened to it twice.
Great. So what was your takeaway from it, or your thoughts from it?
I felt a little nostalgic listening to it because I started listening to this podcast at around, I want to say episode 24 or 25 or 26. It was right around the time when Adam made his debut on the show.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So hearing those little references to past episodes that you would tell the audience to dig for, I thought, oh yeah, I actually know what you're talking about.
Adam made his debut, and I think I started my Advil habit.
Like I remember listening to those every week and finding it very entertaining because Neil and Adam were a force. They were a force.
Yeah.
And I truly feel like because I went to some of those later Anime North recordings and you guys would have a pretty decent crowd, and I feel like it was because of them too. And another thing that I remember doing around the time of those earlier days was I think I was in grade 12 when I actually made the trek to York University to listen to one of the episodes live. And I remember getting lost at Bethune for a while too. But
oh wow. In the building itself, and you just couldn't find us.
Took a little while, yeah. And remember, this was during a time when cell phones were not prevalent either.
No, not the way they are now, at least.
Yeah. Took a while, but it's just thinking back on like those little things, like my little memories of the podcast, and yeah, it was good to reminisce on that stuff. It really was.
Hmm.
A lot of good topics, some good debates. Like I think of the Kodomonoji Khan debate between Courtney and Adam.
Well,
Oh,
yeah,
that
and
was
yeah, it's like it's sort of
amazing.
like it's yes or no. Kodomo Jikan, no Jikan, and in comparison to where we are now with those type of topics and in its depiction in anime, manga, and light novels, it's sort of like going from Elvis swiveling his hips back in the day to God, what are we watching on MTV on something like HBO now? Is that a comparable? I mean, maybe we're talking extremes, but are we along that type of track when we look at the evolution of questionable material in our fandom?
I think it's interesting because we've always had questionable material, from Angel's Egg to Bible Black to Urotsuki Doji to Aiken and School Days, and the list goes on and on. But
The two of those were hentai that you just mentioned.
yeah,
That's a
there's
big difference.
from
And
multiple.
then we have
There's
some
always
things now, two anime this season that I would say blur the lines. Let's put it that way, because it definitely feels like there are a few more now that blur the lines. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
and Boku no Pico and Kiss Sis and and so on and so forth. Like you gotta have all the extremes there.
I
But
want to say Kiss Sis is a very classic and respectable discotheque title that just came out in January. Remember that, Kevin?
they licensed
Do.
that? I
Yeah,
didn't.
they licensed
I didn't realize they did.
they licensed the OAD, not the TV series, the OAD from 2008. And so there's been jokes
Huh.
there saying who was the one that worked on it. Was it Justin or was it Brady or who was it? Because it's become a joke now.
Mm-hmm. So I guess depends in the eye of the beholder when I make that ask that question, I suppose, because I'm not totally sure. I'm not totally sure if where things have changed in that sense, or maybe just greater awareness, I suppose.
Mm.
And I think the only thing that really has changed in that time frame is the way fandom interacts, and pointed out more, for better or worse, of course.
I also
Okay.
remember going to those Anime North tapings too, and
Wow, double dose Advil for me.
Which one were you at, Kevin?
sorry.
Which one were you at?
I feel like I was there for episode 50, and
Was that the
Wait, did we
suit
dress
one?
up for which episode did we dress up for, Mo?
I think it was 50. The suits one was 50, right?
Yeah,
I remember
don't
that
remember when the
taping.
suits. I don't remember when we did the suits episode, but I really could not remember.
that was
when
a
we did the
magical
original.
night.
I think I
I'll
took
blur.
photos of that night. It was it was so.
Yeah, there must have been photos of us in the suits, wasn't there? I
Yeah, there's
thought
an
there was.
old photo. There's an old photo of us in the suits. I don't think I have it, but I know Mo did, and
I
I
I
sent it to
honestly
him.
don't
remember.
have it anymore.
Oh, it's
I
missing.
remember that I had to leave. Like, I think I had to leave at some point at like 1 or 1:15. I really didn't want to leave. Like, I was having
It's like
so much fun in the audience. Like, I met people in the audience, and we were just like, we were complete strangers, and we just like started chatting and just having a great time.
the power of Neil and Adam, I suppose.
Dynamic duo.
Mo, Jeff, do you have a thought on the 15th?
Congrats on 15. Here's the 15 more.
Well, or like 15 straight on through, more like it. Jeff?
I think on my end, I think it's interesting because in the early episodes, you would at least I'd say often refer to the audience, and I always kind of considered Kevin and myself the audience. So it's weird that 40% of the cast is the former audience that was often talked about. But I think that as far as specific memories, I think the first time I was kind of invited up as to share my opinions, it was an episode with Adam there, and of course, I was first or second year university student. I was nervous. It was my first time being recorded in such a way, but I distinctly remember Adam dissing 90s animation, and that pretty much igniting me because he was saying, "Oh, all 90s cartoons were garbage," and it's the generational gap, and I'm thinking now it's like, oh, did he really think that before eras were that great?
I
So
remember that episode.
I remember
Now
bringing
that
up
you
like,
talk about
really,
that.
Pinky and the Brain and Animaniacs and Batman and Gargoyles were garbage. Like, it was. I think it was significant because it was, the first time that like I was confident enough to you know, argue my points against someone who was, a senior or a senpai, to use Japanese terminology.
Keep in mind, I was into Thundercats back in the day. Oh wow, and I guess Transformers, in many
And
respects
as
as
we
well.
said, many of ours, as it went on, they weren't there to just sell the toys, as they say, right?
No, that's well, yeah, we've had that. We've talked about that at length, ad nauseum.
Actually, it was funny, Mike, just to end off the point on the 15 years and that, I thought about it again midweek because I was listening to Bob McCowan's podcast, and he had on George Strompolopoulos, so Strombo. And
Mm.
that was a very interesting episode and stuff like that. And they
Strombo was
even
an intern with him at the time,
correct.
like in
And
the early
so they
'90s.
and so they were talking about Strombo being on Hockey Night in Canada and how it all played out, which he said it played out like he figured it would and stuff like that. And they had these different conversations, but there wasn't as much Bob McCowan. Bob McCowan basically let Strombo speak and stuff like that. And some people mentioned that in the comments, and it brought it back to our show and how you said you wanted to make it feel like primetime sports and stuff like that. And it was about, as we said, the conversations and stuff like that. And even Strombo in the interview, if you want to call it that, or the conversation of that podcast, talked about the same thing, saying that Bob McCowan said, I'm not bringing on the sports players and stuff like that. They have nothing to provide. They have nothing to talk about and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
so,
I think what's noteworthy here, and I guess this is like sports talk Canada, but a very Canadian thing to talk about. George Stroumboulopoulos, since he was fired as host of Hockey Night in Canada and replaced back with Ron McLean, he hasn't spoken too much publicly about that experience. So that would be an interesting
so
listen.
this is one of the first times, yeah, I think he's talked about, like he talked about how there was once Rogers got Hockey Night in Canada and stuff like that, the rights and all that. It was kind of like this hush hush dealings between him and himself
Hmm.
and them. And then he said Keith Pele, who is no longer with Rogers, had his back and stuff like that. But when they did this, they're like, yeah, George, we're going to do this. We're going to do a 180. We're going to make it more modern, stuff like that with Hockey Night in Canada, all this stuff. And he's like, are you guys sure you want to go this, like fully go on? Because he was prepared to take it that way. But he said he had the idea of Ron McLean. He said, we got to keep Ron McLean and he should do the first game and then I'll do the second game of the doubleheader and we'll just gradually do it and stuff like that and we'll get things going. But he also had some interesting
Mm.
things saying demographics wise, he was helping them get younger demographics into Hockey Night in Canada. He was helping them get female and more younger people in there that just were not there before, as he said. And the
Yeah,
other thing of that he
but
just knew the funny thing is he said he lasted longer than he thought he was going to last because he
and he
figured he
lasted.
was going to get canned at some point. And when
Yeah, and
he
he
was about to get
lasted.
canned, he knew he was going to get canned, and him and his team like were prepared for that. And he's like, well, that's how life goes. And he talked about the business and said you can't last forever and stuff like that. And he
And it's
said
worth.
that they've reverted back a bit, but he said they really need to change and stuff like that. And he said it hit home really with the George Floyd, and he said a lot of the athletes were doing a better job talking about this point in time than the sports broadcasters and all these people that just they felt like they were just out of place and out of touch with how
Yeah,
they
that's
were.
it's. Yeah, I know where you're going. I
Well,
think I know where you're going. It's weird. And for reference, Stroumboulopoulos was kicked off or was let go 2 years in, and so we're talking about 4 or 5 years ago now.
And he thought he
And
was going to be a year and a half, he said. He figured it was a
mhm,
year and a half,
Oh,
and then they
No,
wouldn't be
well,
able to do it because he thought the change would be just too much. And that, I guess, even though they're a small piece of the pie, they're a very vocal piece of the pie that I guess
yeah,
watch.
it's like it was the realization that hockey night, something like Hockey Night in Canada, is very old boys club and very stodgy and conservative in its own way,
And they
right?
talked about that too. And the other crazy thing is he
mm,
said some people in the NHL, some players came up to him and said Hockey Night in Canada was a racist broadcast. Now, that's all he said, but who knows where they were going, but maybe we could
It's
think of where they were going on certain aspects of that.
Kevin. Do you have a last thought?
oh, I was just thinking, you can see how out of touch they are just because most of these broadcasters are older, male, and Caucasian. So you're they wouldn't have been as exposed to that kind of stuff, or maybe they would have been not as cognizant of these issues. Like, because if you don't deal with those issues yourself, like, how can you expect to relate to it? I guess that's, or maybe that's not fair to say, but let's just say when I hear those complaints that they feel out of touch, I just am not surprised at all.
Mo.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's one of those things where like everyone kind of just knows, like it's just agreed upon that that's just the way it is because it's been around for so long, and the people running out of or of a certain or of a certain age. It reminds me of the whole like Royals interview from last week, right? Everyone being shocked
Oh,
that the family's a dynasty that old may or may not be racist, right? I mean, it's like, come on, guys.
Yeah, I guess it
But there were
depends
certain
on where you
things,
sit.
there were certain things that were funny. Like even at the end of the interview, George Strompolopoulos, he had one line where he said he was at Burning Man. Of course, we know he's from Much Music. He loves music and stuff like that. He's a
He
professional
does,
host
I
in
think,
that.
spend. I don't know. I think he may actually live in the States these days too.
Yes, so I'll tell you about that in a bit. But
Well,
Burning
that's
Man,
a
for that, he was there 3 a.m. at a rave and he's just partying out. And then he said a kid, and he said, well, that means the guy's in his 20s or whatever, just turned and said, Strombo? What are you doing here? And so he's like, and then he turns to her friend and says, hey, it's the host of Hockey Night in Canada. And he said he just was laughing. But the other thing on him, on Strombo being in the States, so now he's doing something with Apple TV, I believe. But
yes,
oh,
he
okay.
splits his time
yes.
basically between Toronto and LA. And at the moment he was doing the podcast with Bob, he was actually in LA and he joked about that. He said, well, I had to get to LA because I had to talk to the Apple people. I had to do these other things. So he had his studio at his home in LA and he was able to do things from there better than from Toronto. So he went in this pickup truck and drove across the border and they were like, what the hell are you doing? You could have flown. And this was like a few months ago. He's like, no, I need the truck. They just let him through and stuff like that. And so I think they joked, are you
Huh.
going to come back to Canada? And he said, well, I can't really do that right now. My social media people would kill me with probably all the bad coverage about him having to go through quarantine hotel and all this stuff. I think Bob McCown said, are you going to pay the tax to get back into Canada or something like that? But I think
Hotel
he's
and
staying
stuff.
in LA till everything cools off. But I don't hold that against him or anything like that, even though I think he's still all in for
Yeah,
Canada and stuff like that.
he's fascinating to me. I mean, he's the epitome. He and maybe somebody like Keith Olbermann, they're the epitome of like people who can talk about many different disciplines. In the case of Strombo, it was sports, but certainly music. In the case of Olbermann, it would be sports for sure. Politics in the latter parts of his career.
Definitely
And
politics.
I'd say Strombo, he's gotten better at that. Like when he went to the CBC and did his show there, as he said, that grew him as a host and stuff
In
like
terms
that,
of
interviewing
societal
all those
issues. Oh
different
yeah,
people from Prince Charles to many other people in the political sphere and other spheres.
true. And well, as I said, he's a fascinating guy, and certainly we should put that up. And I guess we'll end off the thoughts on 15 years for us as it relates, it's worth noting again. Remember, this podcast was based on the intelligence of sports talk radio, because I know sports talk radio these days can be a lot of people screaming at each other. But I really wanted to dial it back to some of the more intellectual parts of sports talk, which sometimes is lost. And I think in recent years, sports talk has evolved as well. And sometimes kicking and screaming. Remember, we're at a slight crossroads here in terms of sports talk broadcasting on a national basis in Canada, with the breakups of two very noteworthy pairs in the genre, in Jay and Dan on TSN, and formerly of FS1, and Tim and Sid, which went through changes as well, with Sid going more mainstream with doing breakfast television recently. And they tried to go a bit younger, to more younger demographics. And I know Tim and Sid had its younger fan base, but they really didn't have it in older demographics, as far as I could tell. But we'll see but I'm not totally sure that older demographic that Bob McCowan appealed to follows him onto podcasts these days. That's the interesting little to and fro between that all. And but as I said, shows like Tim and Sid, more recent times, like Tim and Sid, and of course primetime sports and sports reporters from the ESPN or TSN versions, those were the inspirations for this show. And those are somewhat bygone, or have evolved and had to change. And here we are still, and we try over the past 15 years, and then the 3 years since we returned, it's still, I think, has had trouble finding its legs, especially in those initial 18 or so episodes of version 2. And I think it's closer now to the way it was, I think, at its peak in version 1, when we're with these current versions of the bi-weekly episodes, and the way we give ourselves time to research it and try and understand things a little bit better, and watch things and read up on all this stuff. And hopefully my fear is, as the pandemic hopefully winds down, that my fear is where, once again, what will become of this podcast? Will we be able to do it like this again, to this type of quality? Well, online, yes, or in person. I think we had that conversation briefly just before we continued recording. And I guess we'll all meet up again, and we'll worry about it when that time comes. Right? And one last thing, and as I said, I will try and watch that episode of the Bob McCowan podcast.
I posted it down below.
Yeah.
Just to let you know. So,
and it's on YouTube. It's on wherever you get your podcasts. And I will say, just to end off this thought, has an awesome theme song as well.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and a familiar sounding theme song. If you know what I mean, just click on the links. Okay, now we can officially start. Well, we went a while on that. We can officially start the bullets.
Sorry for that thought there, Mike. It's just something that came back to me, and that's why I brought it up.
No, it's great. It's fine. But let's officially start the bullets, and we'll reintroduce it with the other introduction I use for the bullets, which is
what was this podcast again about, Mike?
Yeah, anime.
Anime? Okay, we're talking about anime.
Actually, let's really go into the anime stuff again. And as we start the bullets segment, which are presented in point form but could become full essays. There you go. I went with the other introduction. Well, you mentioned Discotheque a couple minutes ago. I don't know how many minutes ago, but you did mention Discotheque, James, and Discotheque did it again. They had another online presentation on Twitch and had a few things to announce. Let's keep it quick because we've already used up 23 minutes.
We did talk about it before, saying, they are going to do another one, and this one was going to be a smaller one, and they joked about that. And their smaller one, they joked as they ended, they said, holy smokes, it's almost 2 hours. So their question portion went longer than they thought. I think they ended up talking about Mike Toole and home ownership They talked
Oh yeah.
about some other things.
Well, this sounds like a regular episode of this podcast then.
That's
In
what
that
I was
sense.
Oh yeah,
gonna be fun.
I missed it. So I
There were some great
kind of sad
things.
I missed it.
Now, the question and answers were just interesting. It's like they were talking about Canadian distribution, which was the same answer we had from before, and that is the owners are working on it. The other thing in the question and answer is that some things they can answer. So sometimes people don't realize they keep on asking about things that they have no relation to. It's like one of their partners. So like TMS, for example, because people were asking about Lupin the Third, Part 5, and the Lupin and Detective Conan special, or it was the movie, because supposedly TMS was leaking that they were dubbing that. And so they were asking about that to Discotheque, and they can't answer that because, yes, they might do it at some point later on, but that's all on TMS at the moment. So until they cross that bridge and they can actually seal the deal, they won't be able to talk about it. But it feels like people think, oh, they already have it, but they don't really already have it. It's just funny seeing it again and again. But they don't specifically call out because, as they said in their thing, they said we won't be answering anything about prospective licenses and stuff like that. So it's just all silence. But of course, that just ignites the stream with the questions, doesn't it?
Never really. Well, just like everything else, no matter how much you try and put a lid on it, it leaks or just boils
But
over anyway.
But we'll talk about now. It's like the licenses they did announce, and then the big one that they talked about, which was the big one they were teasing. So the licenses were they started off with Dear Brother, and this one's
Hell
big
yeah.
because from the creator of Rose of Versailles and that. And the funny thing about this one is I keep forgetting the anime was actually done early 90s, so it was like 91, 92, and around there, even though the manga is from the 70s. And it still looks like that. So it's just funny watching that. But for that one, just to let people know, and they made a point of it, it's going to be coming out this summer, but it's going to be a very short window for the license, like maybe 2 years. So if you want it, you better get it, they said. So that was a warning on that one. And if you're a fan of Rosa Versailles, then yeah, you might want this in your collection. I know some people that got it through Anime Souls and they love it, even though that was bare bones. And I'm sure Discotheque is going to put the love and care in this one too.
Talking with some of our longtime listeners, Squirrely already said they've contacted Angela on this one. I think we've given away a bit of Squirrely's idea on that.
Yeah, like now this one's the interesting one. Now we got great sets for Rosa Versailles from Right Stuff. Now for the Anime Souls, if we put money in, even though they were bare bones, we love the sets. You can watch Dear Brother if you want to get a check on it on Retro Crush, just to let you know. But for this, it's going to be the best it can be, and I think it's worth the double dip if you already have the Anime Souls release. But it'll be worth something to peek at, especially if you've watched and liked Rosa Versailles. So we'll leave that be.
Like all 500 people who own that show.
Well, once again, it comes down to, yes, there are diehards and will own something a couple times over.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll buy this one because I've seen several clips of the show. People like, cause I feel like Retro Crush has done a good job of like taking certain clips and putting them on Facebook. So people, and then those get shared on social media because some of these clips are like so melodramatic that it's just hilariously awesome.
And they've done that with a lot of their animes and stuff like that through different social medias, and it's been fantastic.
Okay.
Like this one clip of like this one accusation of this girl in this classroom. I wish I knew who the characters were, but that alone sold me on the show. I'm like, yes, this is like the old school shoujo melodrama that is missing in my life.
Okay, James. Well, as I said, I missed the presentation myself,
okay.
And once again, just to double down on this sentiment, you're also listening to hear some of the banter that goes on between Mike, Justin, and Brady.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of it we were talking about beforehand, and there were some great things talked about. They talked about more Lupin, of course, is coming down the pipe and stuff like that. They talked about Memories. It now has a release date. It's going to release in June, and they put the
Nice.
spin polish, and they were talking what's going into it on the disc. It's going to be a plethora of extras. Like Justin worked really hard on this, and probably took some people down with him as well. So,
Mhm.
well, they joke. They say sometimes it's another team member taking the other team members down on their project. So he said, I'll do it for this one." So,
Nice
but
work, guys.
they love each other. But the other licenses, they talked about cornering the market on cat anime because they had two licenses on that, Nienbo, and they also had Michiuri Neko. And those ones I don't know much about, but they are involving cats. Now, the other ones, they had a streaming only license. They announced Kekakashi, and
Hmm.
that's going to be there. They didn't say anything on the Tail series, even though those are streaming on Crunchyroll and they have the license to them. They have announced though that, what was it, Sayuki, the 2 seasons that Genion had, they're streaming those, and those are for streaming only. The other thing they had that was on Crunchyroll, they're going to release physically. They said Magical Girl Ore,
Oh
and
God.
yeah, that's something. And then they had a license rescue from Media Blasters. They're going to bring Kashimashi Girl Meets Girl back onto Blu-ray, and that's going to come out in May. And that one was one I enjoyed. That was one of the
Same.
various Yuri animes that Media Blasters brought out in the late aughts and stuff like that. And I think it was an enjoyable one of many they brought. And then finally, I guess we can't forget the big one. Well, it's another big one they had. We'll talk about the big one after this. But Sergeant Frog, they said the whole kit and caboodle of Sergeant Frog, they're going to
Yeah.
bring it out on SD Blu-ray, and we'll see how it goes. I don't think we're going to see that ADV Films dub. We're probably going to see the Funimation dubs for however many episodes they did, but they are going to get all 358 episodes over a certain amount of discs because, God forbid, they wouldn't be able to do it in one or two sets.
So
And
that
that'll be
means
over the next 2 years.
so that means just at some point the dub will just end then.
Yes.
Correct. Just kind of like
Oh,
Kodansha. Just like
yeah, I was about to
Okay.
Kodansha.
say
Yeah.
Kodocha. That's
Kodansha.
all I
Yeah.
could think
Kodansha. Yeah.
when that comes up. Any other thoughts?
And then so the big one.
Yeah, this
They
is the
kept
big one. This one was fascinating.
they kept on talking about the big one, and this wasn't a license announcement. It was actually an update on Project Echo, and they had good banter on this because they said, "Well, we're going to stop the restoration and remaster of Echo." So why would they do that? I don't know why they would do that. Maybe they just don't care about Echo anymore, and they just want to get rid
Yeah,
of it, right?
right.
Well, actually, they said, and this was their big announcement, it's going to take longer to come out because they found the original film, the original 35 millimeter film, and they're going to take that and that's going to be used as the base. And they were showing it first what they did, and it looks fantastic. So they're going to use that as the base. Yes, they spent a lot of money to try and do the thing with the Doomsday device and all this other stuff, but it's better just to go with that 35 millimeter film and use that and then make it the best it can be. And hey, shit happens, as they say, right?
No,
But
that's a fascinating point.
It was thanks to Robert Woodhead of Animigo.
yeah, I was gonna say Bob Woodhead did some great things on this. He said that another person tipped them off. Well, they tipped him off because he's doing another Kickstarter coming up. They have a preview of it now, Maddox 01, and supposedly for that one, he thought that was lost, and then they tipped him off and they said, "Oh, it's somewhere else within the company that held it," and then they were able to find it. And then the same thing, he kind of, I guess, said maybe it's the same for Aiko, and he passed that information on to Discotech that maybe they're looking in the wrong place. Maybe it's on the wrong sheet of paper, like a clerical error or something like that, and they found it somewhere else. And it was all as it should be. So it's weird how those things can happen. Just a small mistake or a small misfiling can lead to something just being collecting dust, right?
And
Until you
that
finally get there.
it's it's almost like you can just add that to the pile of all those odd little stories that go along with the production of anything Discotech does. Like this is the probably the single most fascinating story, background story that you're going to hear.
And as they said, they had a lot of no. Robert Wood had some great tweets after it. It was just kind of some banter back and forth. One person thought the first one was a little off, but they said no, this was Bob just having some good thing because it
No,
was
this
kind
is
of a thing of him finding Maddox, then him finding Aiko, then him saying, "Oh, they spent all this money and stuff like that on this, even though they didn't have to." It was just absolutely funny, but it was all in
well,
good
that's
jest.
it's that's sort of Robert Woodhead in a nutshell. Actually, he has that sarcastic way of expressing himself.
And they have that too for Justin Brady and all of them, and they were joking about too that they've been very he's been beneficial to them in other ways, but they themselves, as Bob has said, and they have said too, that they have been beneficial to him for some of his anime projects
Mm.
to help him find materials. So it's been a thing that's gone both ways, and then bringing back some of his old favorites like Orange Road, and about bringing back some of those Lupin ones that he had. So he is happy that they're able to see the light of day, and he's more than happy, as he said, to help them either find those old dubs or find things that he has to help them out, and the road goes both ways. So,
I'm not going
and
to
you,
say Yawara. Sorry. Okay,
That thought
but
crossed my mind too, Mike.
you knew that I'd say it, or just generally speaking.
That you would say it because Animigo never did finish their Yawara release back in the day.
Not that I'm bitter. Sorry, I broke your train of thought, James.
no, I was just thinking that it's nice to actually see that, isn't it? Because that doesn't always happen to be the case where sharing is caring, right?
Oh yeah,
They
I know.
might ask for a big chunk of change, or they just might be unwilling for whatever reason to let something see the light of day again, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
The Evangelion dub.
Oh, ouch. That's a good one. So what is it again? I like you. I love you. I love you, zebra again.
So are we
Okay.
getting ready to watch that final Ava movie, like on a camcorder footage, I guess?
No, but we could be fined millions of dollars. Or no, that's if you distribute it illegally. That was the threat that Kara put out earlier this week. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, I would say Demon Slayer is probably the bigger risk.
Oh, one thing I wanted to say that interested me about Kashimashi is that they're going to update the subtitle track, and that they intend to be more careful with gender and pronouns. So that's a nice little touch, gotta say. I also watched that show back in the day, and I loved it.
That'll be interesting then,
And I would
considering the climate we're in.
and I would say too, they always go through their subtitles and give it a good fresh eyes and stuff like that. Because I saw, for example, I forget which one I was watching. Thermae Romai, actually, I was watching recently, and the base translation was from Siren Visual from Australia. But then they had, I think it was one of their people just went over, gave it a fresh eyes just to make sure everything was good, correct, and just do some editing and stuff like that. And they always do that, which is nice. You know what I mean? To make sure it's up to snuff. So they do that for every series, which is great.
Okay. I don't know what else I really add to this. It's, as I said, Discotheque kind of did it again. Although, once again, I'll say, I love you, zebra.
Also, Kakaishi is a good show, and people should watch it. Criminally underrated. Manga and anime. I've read the entire manga. Fantastic.
Okay. So let's move on then, okay? I think we talked enough Discotheque. And always plenty of discussion whenever they do something. James, this is your caller. ICV2. You sent us a couple of interesting little interviews. Early March, they had a manga week. They called it.
And I think Kevin actually talked about this one too, I think, as well, because he was taking a look at some of those articles too, wasn't he?
Yeah, I was. I just mentioned it, and then I think, but you supplied the links. I think is what happened.
So thanks, both of you, because I took a read of them. So three little interviews that ICV2 did, and there's probably more because this was part of their manga week series, but these ones were interesting regardless. Kevin Hamrick, Viz Media's vice president of publishing sales. Yen Press publisher Kurt Hassler, and the one and only, for better or worse, Stu Levy of Tokyo Pop fame. They all had their takes on where they stood during Manga Week, and the interviews were wide-ranging in terms of Hamrick and Hassler. They talked more about their respective companies and how they're doing and how they're coping. But Stu Levy's was probably the most interesting and as expected to be. Where do we go? Which way do you want to go with talking about this? Where do you want to start?
Let's start with the big boy.
Oh boy.
Oh, you
Okay.
want to start with the DJ Milky himself?
No, you know who I meant. I meant Viz Media.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
you mean the one that Stu Levy said he didn't mention by name, but basically said owns 50% of the market and he respects them because they worked for it.
It's funny. It's funny because Viz was originally more affiliated with Shogakukan, and it was like the early 2000s is when Shueisha put their stake into it, and
that's when it sent them into overdrive, it feels like, almost. You know what I mean?
yep.
And that's sort of where we are now, really. And obviously, they're happy with how things have gone. Obviously, there's a for better or worse scenario when it comes to how the pandemic has affected them. And they're like, generally speaking, they're happy about it. They went through all their titles, and they acknowledge little bumps in interest in titles after their anime counterparts became hits. They acknowledge a bump in older issues, back issues. I think backlist they call them.
Yes.
Yeah, they've
Backlist becoming more of a thing for them right now.
There's been several volumes of stuff that have been out of print. Like I know, like several volumes of Kami-sama Kiss from their Shoujo Beat line were out of stock for a while. I think those are the plan is to reprint those. Recently, on the Shoujo Beat feed, they announced Nana volumes 1 and 2 will be reprinted at some point. And it makes you wonder whether or not that was doing well as of late, because the Nana craze has long petered out. Certain volume, like I think even Chainsaw Man, you can't find volume 2 right now. It's out of stock. It happened with Jujutsu Kaisen as well. Like, yeah, people, that article mentioned how like there are seeing an uptick of like volume 2s, volume 3s, volume 4s being sold. So you have people are actually going a little deeper into their purchases.
And they were talking about, I guess, the fact for them, I know the others were saying that they didn't see the uptick till quarter 4, but Viz seemed to see it a little earlier, and probably that's due to their stronger shonen line and stuff like that. But the other thing was the online sales, they said, were very strong and were triple-digit increases, and that was even backing out Amazon, because all of them were talking about how Amazon is now the big boy that they deal with and helps them make some decisions and stuff like that. But for Viz, they said that isn't just Amazon. They were talking about Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, Right Stuff, Indigo, and even mainstream like Target and Walmart being big factors for them and stuff like that on the online front. And then I think Stu Levy pointed out that that is at the detriment of some of the small people like the comic book stores and the smaller indie shops and stuff like that. And some of them relied on Diamond and had to scramble to find other sources when Diamond shut down for a bit and stuff like that. And when they had shutdowns, right? Because they couldn't just open, and not all of them could do curbside pickup and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's.
Right.
I want to come back to the one last Viz thought a bit later, but yeah, now that we're on Stu Levy, and nice transition, by the way, James. He like Stu's was the most interesting because he like there was that point. Remember, Tokyo Pop was the name at the time. They were the big boy when it came to manga.
They were, yeah. you could say that I think at one point in the early to mid 2000s they were bigger than Viz.
Because they were scooping them all
Even
up.
when you factor in Shonen Jump launching around that time, they just had they were definitely riding that wave because, you know, as some people may or may not remember, they were the ones that forced the industry's hand in unflipping manga.
Well, yeah, we've had this talk before about that.
As
Mm-hmm.
Fred Shaw would say, taking the work out of the manga industry, huh? Or the localization.
Yeah.
They were ambitious as well, right? Like with you know, they were much, you know, made fun of and mocked, but with the American made manga, they were, you know, huge with that. And you know, you could argue about how successful that risk was, but I think, you know, it's interesting that I think, you know, from the beginning they've kind of been about, well, not beginning, but from my observation and entry point, they've kind of been on, let's see what happens. This looks cool. Let's try this, which I can
Yeah.
definitely respect.
Well, it's in retrospect, maybe though that experimentation is probably what's kept them going to this point. Like, yeah, after the bottom out, and they had to, you know,
Depends on how
then
you
they
look
had
at it.
to, yeah, it's.
And as Stu Levy
And I'm
admitted, now
saying this
they're
as some as
a boutique publisher now and stuff like that. And
well.
they talked about their line, I guess, what was it? Love,
Well, they
Love,
had
or
to,
something like that, which is
and
stories
they had,
focused on LGBTQ stories and different yaoi stories and stuff like that that you don't see across the board as much.
and then the use of Disney IP
Correct.
here as well.
Yeah.
So, as I said, this is once again a for better or worse type scenario. But it was an interesting, like that pivot, I thought was interesting because obviously during the bottom out, they couldn't depend on those on Japanese titles anymore because then a lot of the original publishers were going other ways and
Or they
in a
had
lot of
stakes
cases
in
doing it
some of
themselves.
the international publishers.
Yes. So that's what you started having. And like Levy's was like so across the board, but so fascinating what he said, right?
And there were
But
other things we saw too, just
well,
to
which one? Which one do you want to go with for a second there, James?
just
Which
for a
part of that?
second, just to say that I know Kurt Hassler had the one point, and it was a quote that I think was important and it's still relevant, is that he said, if you have an anime that is successful, it will skyrocket your sales and stuff like that. And they're still seeing that and probably seeing that even more during the pandemic because more people are watching streaming services and stuff like that, different animated shows, and want to go back to that original source. So it's definitely affecting maybe some of their back catalog, as they said.
Hey,
In a good,
Garashi.
yeah, in a good way, in a good way, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, like for better or for worse, especially in
once
the
again,
case of
for better or worse.
Higurashi. Well,
Yeah, I mean,
I've documented my struggles of purchasing that manga series, but yeah, Higurashi went massively out of print in the last few months. I do feel like, well, even though the anime, this new anime series is divisive, I do feel like it did bring attention to the manga, and lots of those volumes are massively out of print now. And like
So
people are paying 4 digits for complete Higurashi sets now on
you're saying
secondhand
I should
market.
cash out? I should cash out now, Kevin? Is that what you're saying?
If you're not attached to it, yes. And we've heard how Kurt Hassler is a big fan of those 7th expansion Ryukishi of 7 titles. So
And
a
that's
part of me
how
likes
they
to think,
did that.
yeah, a part of me likes to think that he really wants to reprint it, but maybe he just can't, they just can't justify it from a monetary sense.
I
I
know.
don't know.
I think it would be the same as well. But
mm,
it was one of those things. Higurashi was the key, and he pushed it through, and they found a way to continue and complete it. And then somehow they decided to do Umineko, and they just power through on that one as well. And a lot of it was through the omnibus format, and the other thing was a little bit of a higher price and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
even at that higher price, it's kind of crazy, as you said, how high it's gotten now, right?
mhm. Well, okay, so pivot for another second here.
So we wanted to go back to Stu Levy and his thoughts
I mean,
on
there's a yeah. As I said, that's the one that sticks out, and he.
and
Oh wait, let's give it a. Well, let's go there. We'll go there in a second, Mo.
I mean, I'm just gonna say the whole Stu Levy thing. It's like, you know, rising tide rides all ships kind of situation. I mean, yes, manga readership may not be where it's supposed to be at or whatnot, but more anime watchers equals more manga readers, right?
Maybe, maybe not.
That's how it's become nowadays. Like,
yeah, it's a weird. Yeah, it's an interesting way to mention it. I mean, you would have assumed we obviously there is an overlap between anime and manga, and to a lesser degree light novels, because that's that was a point brought up by Hassler, but it's not as pronounced or one for one as people may hope it is. At least certainly the companies would be hoping it would be. There's a certain lamenting about, like, going back to Stu Levy for a second, because who wouldn't? He kind of lamented the lack of digitization in the industry to this point, at least in the same way that it's happened in terms of movies and anime.
And
yep.
that's where I think he was talking, and there's some really good points on that
About
fact. And
how we've tripped.
I feel like we've talked about it, and when we talk about digitization stuff like that, we're not talking about the digital copies they're doing now and stuff like that. He is talking about things that we thought were going to happen when Crunchyroll did the thing saying there with your subscription you could now read these different manga chapters and stuff like that unlimited. You know what I mean? Kind of like a streaming for manga type thing, but it never really took off and stuff like that. And he was saying a lot of young people in particular are reading webtoons and webtoon type platforms like Tapas, etc. He says, I think that access to content, whether free or for one monthly fee, any example, Kindle Unlimited, things like that, those types of business models are the way that a lot of people are now experiencing entertainment and consuming content. And he was talking about how he thinks people are watching anime now outside of Japan through the streaming and stuff like that. Not necessarily the case with manga, and that piracy is still a huge issue, and maybe that could cut into it and stuff like that. And he talked about how it's kind of like they're still selling it on the old model where it's like, here's your volume one. Hopefully we get enough people and they still stick with us for volume two.
Which is
Yep.
so outdated. I mean, come on, guys.
You can blame Japan on that, I feel.
Yeah,
And
well,
he did
let's go to that in
too,
a
right?
couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go to that in a couple seconds, Geoff.
Yeah, I think that's what stood out to me with the Levy interview compared to the other two, was that this person seems to be the most like interested in sequential arts and comics and manga as a medium. Like all three of them are business people. I certainly will admit that. But with Levy's interview, there was like this curiosity and excitement about like, hey, look, there's this webtoon and webtoon style comics happening, and what's happening with the digital field, and talking about the problems with the comic book stores. Like, he seemed invested in comics as a literature and an art form. And I don't, this is facetious, and I definitely would have respect to the Viz speaker. I forget his name, but that interview seemed like he was almost casual about how successful Viz was. He was like, oh yeah, JoJo, yeah, we got JoJo. JoJo's doing great. Oh, Animal Crossing, all the kids love Animal Crossing. That's gonna make us tons of money. We still got Pokemon. Pokemon's the biggest thing. We're not even making that much new stuff, but we got some Pokemon stuff happening. That's gonna do
Yeah,
well.
the juggernaut just churning right there, right?
Yep.
Yeah, because like
Yeah.
because he was talking about, like, the interviewer was like, oh, so the Pokemon trading card games had a big boom recently. Has that affected your Pokemon sales? And he was like, not really, but it's still doing fantastic, and we got a bunch of Pokemon stuff happening. So, like, just by comparison, like, and again, I don't disparage that. I love a lot of Viz stuff. Like, I'm a massive Pokemon fan, and I like JoJo and all that, lots of stuff he meant. My Hero Academia, love a lot of those properties. But with the Levy interview, there seemed to be a little bit more casualness and sort of interest and fun, which I definitely, respected as more of an artist type person.
It's he like, yeah, going back to the whole digital thing with Stu, like I know the guy. It's
You should call him by his real name, DJ Milky, I believe, Mike.
thank you. Okay, and
You guys are
well,
gonna need to explain this DJ thing to me because I
we'll
have
do it
no
offline.
idea. Okay.
No, well,
Okay,
He
let's put
created
this on
his
the
own
record.
quote unquote original manga. Let's put it that way. Like
okay.
he's definitely a creative person, and it's like for better or for worse, he may have his warts, but you know what I mean. There were some things from his interview that were definitely things we should take seriously and definitely think about because they could be good for the manga market in the future, I think.
Kevin.
Geoff, does Princess Ai ring a bell to you?
I don't think so.
So there were at least a couple of OEL works where he had a direct hand in them, and Princess Ai was one of them, and that was the collaboration comic that he did with Courtney Love, the singer. Well, not the
Okay.
singer. She wasn't a singer. She was like Kurt Cobain's
Wait,
spouse. Yeah, and I think he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was involved with the alteration of the music in Initial D, like like when they put out the anime.
Oh, yeah. I'm getting nightmares about
Wow,
that music now.
this story is
It's all
going
coming back to me.
lots of directions.
Like he wanted to, like, like it plays into what you were saying about how he wanted to dip his hands into different things and in terms of the artistic aspects of the company.
Yeah, and once again, it may have messed up the original vision.
Like,
Did he want
there are
to?
some. Sorry,
But
go on.
depends.
Did he want to replace like Space Boy with like some Western song?
Oh, it's been so long. I don't even remember all the edits, but
Well, okay.
but for better or for worse, like, some of these changes were good, some of these changes were bad. Like, I am thankful that he introduced us to like Felipe Smith and Svetlana Shmenkova, and we also got exposure to some great novels at the time, like Full Metal Panic and the 12 Kingdoms. But then
and he did bring some anime at the very beginning, and they tied it into some of the manga they released, like GTO and stuff like that. So.
GTO is most noteworthy to me.
because they were the ones who Kodansha worked with the most in the early 2000s. This was before Kodansha decided to go their own way, and they went, and that was with Del Rey coming out in the mid 2000s. That was kind of like the beginning of the end for Tokyo Pop in that sense, because they slowly started to lose access to the Kodansha back catalog.
Because they had Clamp, they had Love Hina and stuff like that, and some other big hits from Kodansha, and so that's where the
GTO,
slide.
Yeah, this can go on and on. But
So was DJ Milky his pen name?
Yes.
Correct. It was his pen name, and so a lot of people
Okay.
had a good jokes, and there were some other ones other than Princess Ai and stuff like that. But
Okay.
he's such an interesting character, even with the reality show and all this stuff, because he definitely feels like a creative person and stuff like that. But his background, his education, he was actually had a law degree and all this stuff, and could have been a lawyer. But then he did this, and he enjoys it a lot more. He seems to feel, he says in past interviews, and that.
Yeah,
there's your spark joy right there.
At the same time, it's undeniable that some of his actions set the company back, because it really felt like, okay, I won't deny that the closing of borders in the U.S., borders closing in the U.S., definitely impacted his business, without a doubt. But at the same time, I feel like, to me, when they folded the way that they did in the late 2000s or whatever, or maybe it was early 2010s, I don't remember anymore. It kind of felt like he did that on a whim. I didn't feel like it was necessarily a business decision. At least that's the impression I got at the time.
It's hard to say. I don't know. It's
well, a couple things kind of last points that kind of stick out to me, and really I want to talk a little bit more at some other point about Stu Levy, the infamous character in the industry, because he is a, looking back, and this is the anime Rip Van Winkle in me talking. He can be quite polarizing, and well,
And I
he has
think there were
many
some people he
detractors.
would not do an interview with because I know for a fact they wanted to try and get him on Ancast, but he just was not going to do that. And he went and did interviews with some other places and stuff, but he never did Anime News Network or the AN podcast.
Do
ANN
you
podcast.
remember who he did interviews with?
I forget, but there was one that was on YouTube that he did an interview with and stuff like that. But it was interesting.
I have to look for that because I feel like he definitely would have wanted to dodge questions about like the questionable things that he did throughout the years because you knew Zach would have grilled him on that stuff.
No, they would have taken him and asked the questions, and obviously he was not going to take it in the right way and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the other thing you talked about borders in that, and he talked in the interview, interesting enough, that they don't get as much big upfront buys that would be returnables back to them and stuff like that. So that probably helps them out too as a boutique publisher and the other publishers as well.
Well, I'll say this much as we wind this part down. Zach and Stu, something tells me that would have been must listen radio if that ever came to pass.
It would have been must listen to podcast radio, indeed.
Yeah, and and maybe just to tie a bow on it, the thought that came to me was his lamenting that the industry hasn't reached the Netflix, Spotify point. And I know we can talk about that en masse, but his lamenting, but he also kind of started to outline why it will have to get there because of the popularity of things like webtoon and Korean comics and Chinese comics. And his belief is, it sounds like it'll happen with the Japanese side of the industry being pulled into it, kicking and screaming. That's just what he makes it sound like.
And it was interesting too when he talks about being bullish on the digital industry and then talking about the Spotify model is they question him on it and they said, well, what about the original creators? It's like, what about their cut of the can and stuff like that? And he said, well, hold up the phone, stuff like that. Some of them that would have had a hard time under the old model have found ways to earn more money under the subscription model and stuff like that.
That's right.
That was a bold statement.
It was a bold statement to say that the CD era,
he was talking about CDs, yes,
wasn't all that for a lot of people.
And I actually have it right here.
That's a key moment.
I'll read it actually here. I found.
Read it
and
out.
He's talking about the interviewer asked, but the growth of Spotify has crashed the revenue for creators versus the previous model. And then Stu Levy basically says that's a fallacy. I don't know if you've heard of a guy, Bob Lefsetz, a very well-known music analyst and journalist who talks about this a lot. Back in the day, you sold a CD for $16. The only people that could really make money were the people who sold a decent number of CDs. A challenged artist could not make money. Now you're not dependent on the record label. If you put your product out there via Spotify and streamers and it does well, you end up having a lot of control over not only your revenue stream, but your business and your music opportunities. He says there's tons of music artists that don't make money, but there were then too. It's very difficult in content overall, whether you're a filmmaker, musician, or a writer, to do that professionally and pay your bills. And it's basically, we've all aspired to be in creative industries, which is why we're in the business. And it's certainly not easy. It's a privilege to be in the business and stuff like that, which it was interesting to hear that flip side
This
of
was
the coin.
that was like, that's one of the more telling lines in it. And once again, juxtapose this, and I forgot if it was Hamrick or Hassler who kind of said this. It's worth keeping in mind that the domestic market in Japan is shrinking, and that the only way to grow it is to grow it internationally. This is the kicking and screaming point that I brought up.
And they were talking in Stu Levy's about how they may be overtaken by Korea and Japan, stuff like that.
And
he talked about manga versus webtoon and stuff like that. And that was the interesting part to I know.
there's competition in that sense, right? Like if it's a combo of those two things. You have that is one point that Japanese creators will have to think about. It's a great product. It's still a very good product, but there's still something in there culturally that keeps it, that they're so protective about. They have to come to terms with that. Yes or no, right? That's the fascination with just reading these three interviews, all separately, and then look at it all like as a set, because they all sit with each other. And I don't know, as I said, we'll put the links up to these three interviews. They are an interesting read, and then just think about them all as part of the same argument. We can go on and on about this.
We
Trust
could
me, we
come
really
back to it
could.
as we said, right?
Well, we will, and when another development or another thought comes up. Okay, but on the topic of digital, just for a second, and this wasn't in the notes, but I think we should bring it up just for a second because I know James mentioned it to me earlier in the week. Sony stopping download to own of movies. They'll cease that later this year. Or when is it again? I think in the fall.
Yeah,
Or is it
and
on?
and you know what? I was thinking of bringing it up during the discotheque thing because they were talking about it too, about the Blu-rays and stuff like that, and
Yeah, let's.
about the 4K Blu-rays as well, because they were asking if they were going to make more, and they said, "Yeah, we probably will." But they made mention of certain interesting parts of the 4K Blu-rays where they can only do, I think it's 1080p and up for that. So if it's SD, they can't do it like they do with the SD Blu-ray. So that would be a problem for older shows going forward and stuff like that. You would
Mhm,
have to, if you want to do it physically, do Blu-ray or do streaming or do it digital and stuff like that. And so that's an interesting thing into that. And as we said with Sony, they made note of that. They said it was because of customer preference going to the streaming services like that. They're like, no, we're not going to do digital to own or something like that. Now, the real question is how many people were actually buying on the PSN network. I don't think it was big as, say, Apple or Amazon or other places, but
well,
definitely, I'm sure those other big boys, they're probably thinking about it and wouldn't mind pulling the trigger on that at some point in the
yeah, that's the
future and
thing.
stuff
It's
like that
not
because of the way people are consuming things, right?
right.
And
It's not.
so
It's
people are
not
going
common anymore.
towards streaming. It's like streaming is the next thing after Blu-ray. We're going to a discless society, but I hope that we can still buy things and actually have ownership of what we love. You know what I mean? And say we have a piece of it. You know what I mean? Because you don't
Mhm.
have that when you're streaming and stuff like that.
Mo.
Another big problem
Oh,
with, sorry, just with that downloading thing, I definitely would prefer it, at least having it as an option, because I remember when Steven Universe was still airing and they would upload their episodes to the Google store. Um, they would go on and off the Canadian store like every other month. So, like, as far as like which countries have licensing rights and everything, if you download them, that's great. You theoretically, with some limitations, at least have a little bit more, um, you know, uh, chances of that staying on your device. But for streaming, it's up to the whims of licensing agreements and the companies involved.
yeah,
And the thing is,
which
they
has been.
don't give you a heads up and say, oh,
Yeah,
by the way, it's going to be coming off
Yeah,
in a couple of months. It's like, yeah, maybe 1 week or a few days.
I was about to say. So, what's coming off of Netflix this month? Mo.
I mean, for the streaming point of it, I mean, yeah, it sucks. Stuff comes on and off. On the ownership side of it, I mean, I feel like we're gonna get to a point where the only things that we can physically own will be collectible items, right? I mean, limited runs or limited edition stuff that gets released, right? I mean, ownership in and of itself, is like not going to be a thing in like 10 years, right?
Yeah, that's
And it
actually a
was
Yeah,
fair.
funny
that's a
because
good question.
Go,
Yeah.
go ahead. All right, go ahead, James.
Mike Toole made mention of that and stuff like that when they were asking about where Discotheque was going to be later on, and he was saying he was thinking people like us getting those physical products, that's a boutique thing, that only a certain amount of people, it's going to shrink and stuff like that, and then it's going to be interesting to see what medium that is because remember the past 2 years and stuff we've seen that where a lot of the people selling anime, they're just doing Blu-ray now because they can't do DVD. They've said no one's buying DVDs anymore. They just won't, even if it's the same quality and stuff like that compared to SD Blu-ray. They want the actual Blu-ray and stuff like that. They believe it's the better quality. So at some point, right, they're going to think the same thing about digital and stuff like that. They won't buy the discs, right? But
Well,
it
and
won't be
sometimes, and
soon,
once
but
again,
it could be in 10 years, right?
it comes down to just space, the whole space saving idea, Kevin. Because,
And
like I said,
it makes
they
me
they able to fit a lot on Blu-ray. Sorry about that.
no worries.
Oh, go ahead.
It makes me think about how in Toronto, I don't think there are any anime stores that also carry Blu-rays anymore.
We kind of, yeah, and that's something we kind of tackled.
Yeah,
James and I kind of tackled in the 15th anniversary,
yeah,
in our 15th anniversary.
Anime Extreme does not carry Blu-rays, and they don't carry anime anymore for the most part. They may have some stragglers that they don't keep up on display, but they definitely got out of that business. The Beguiling, by and large, doesn't carry that stuff anymore. They did used to. They might still have some leftover stuff, but I don't know if they're regularly keeping stuff, like getting in new things anymore. I know Harry T still has some stuff, but a lot of it's older. I don't know if they've been getting anything new because they've been focusing more on like Warhammer and like TCG sales as of late. Yeah, like
I think your best bet for physical anime in Toronto is Walmart.
I was
That's
thinking
probably
that I was going to say the internet is probably the other place you want to go because even
well.
with our crappy dollar, you can still get. And the thing is, we talked about in the 15th anniversary, right, Mike? They slashed the prices so much that no one is going to make a buck in the brick and mortar of selling these physical discs and stuff like that. It has to be a mass play, and so online is where people are doing that and stuff like that, whether it be
Mm.
yeah,
Amazon or Right Stuff or stuff like that. And I'm still paying, like, it's just boggles the mind how much we're paying now versus what we used to pay and stuff like that. And probably they think now, the people now, they're saying, oh, it's way too expensive and all this stuff. And I was a chump for paying all that money way back then for single discs and all that stuff. But then I wonder, how does any of the creators or any of the team get any money? And we keep on hearing stories about the animators and stuff like that. We could do to pay a little more, you know what I mean?
And we'll
Or
talk about that.
or a little, you know what I mean? They could
Yeah, and I
do
know.
less of a discount or something like
Yeah,
that.
and I know we're gonna have a longer discussion about that in the future, Mo.
Well, I'm just gonna say, I mean, like that's, I feel like that's the road we're going down, right? I mean, in a few years' time or whatever, it's gonna go back to single disc prices. It has to, right? I mean, everything will be limited down to super exclusive, limited run stuff, and everything else will be just streaming. Because, as you said, there's no way you can make money off of releasing the way that they're releasing it, right?
Yeah, so
well,
Well,
what
no,
they'll
there's
have
money
is,
to
as we said, we'll have the discotheque boutique lines for anime and different things like that. But on the
yeah,
mainstream, you're right, we'll have Criterion lines. You know what I mean? And the different studios will have different Criterion lines.
yeah, we'll have to like. The thing is, for this as a living, yeah, I guess we'll have to. There's something I'm not that I haven't seen myself to this point. I'm pretty. Maybe you guys see it right now, but we have to think of like start to change our thinking when it comes to that, I suppose. Oh, and I guess to end this part off, coming back down to Stu, I just remembered he like at the in his interview he talked about, you know, yeah, there will be digitization. There should be digitization, and because just as a general consumption, but in terms of the physical stuff, that still could be that there's still going to be a realm for collectors, and that will maintain the physical side. Although DRM is still going to be a thing too, and it's a mess.
It'll
Really,
be
when we try and talk
interesting too to
now,
see which ones get the Criterion releases or the physical releases because
the collector release.
there are so many shows now that are thrown out, and it's that other thing of, remember, we always had those shows back in the aughts and that because there wasn't as many. Those were the evergreens. Those were the ones we would remember, share with other people, and they always say they're the gateway drugs, the Cowboy Bebops and that. And you wonder how many of those are here now. How many people are going to remember My Hero Academia or Demon Slayer, stuff like that. I hope they do, but we'll see what happens.
The thing is, if they're forgotten, at a point somebody will remember again and we'll be looking for them. So who knows? Because we're saying that about restoring older stuff. Kevin, one last thought, and then we'll move on.
This is a quick little aside, but James, have you watched or read Toilet Bound Hanako-kun?
No, I have not, but I know Kurt Hassler did mention it in his interview, and so I guess I probably should give it a look at some point.
Because, like, that's apparently a huge seller for them. And I guess I didn't really notice how popular that anime became. It's kind of
Was that a
fascinating.
Crunchyroll, or or was that Sentai? I can't remember now.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay.
It was one of the two. It was one of the two.
All right.
It just I just found it surprising. It just seems like it came from out of nowhere, and it just became like a good seller for them. I was in Conspiracy Comics earlier this week, and I heard two girls talking about that show. I was like, oh, interesting.
You never know where your next hit is going to come from, right? So
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so as I said, we can go on and on this
I
topic.
think we've kind of already gone on, Mike. So I think there's a
Yeah,
few
no,
bullets we're going to have
doesn't-
to leave in the chamber, as we say.
Well, there's until another development comes up and something fascinating. Well, I know we'll revisit it again. I know we will. That's inevitable. Okay, so two more things before we end off tonight. Let's go through the anime community calendar as it relates to things we care about here in Toronto, or maybe you'll care about online. And they're all related to places we've been to already. The Japan Foundation Toronto, just a quick reminder, in the shadow or in the offshoot of the JFF Plus last month, that's long done. But some online discussions from it are still up, most notably a discussion about the documentaries that were shown at the JFF Plus. We're going to put up a link to a discussion about them and a talk by three, let's say, well versed critics and scholars on the topic. Jesse Cumming, Dr. Darcy Gauthier, and Joanna Maracle. We'll put up a link to that. Probably worth watching. They'll talk at length about Peace, Torisan and Goto, and Tsukiji Wonderland, which were three of the documentaries that were shown during the film festival. Let's see. This Thursday, March 18th, the Japan America Society of Dallas Fort Worth will continue their series on various aspects of Japanese pop culture, but they'll be a little bit more topical this time. They're going to do a talk on Japanese pop culture's response to COVID-19. Roland Keltz, Seo Nakajima, Aki Nakanishi, and moderator Bill Sutzi will talk at length, and I'm pretty sure that'll be an interesting discussion. I think last time we talked about the Japan America Society, Matt Alt appeared on that.
Correct.
So that'll be an interesting talk for sure. And finally, the Japan Foundation New York and its ongoing series about taking academic views of Japanese pop culture, anime, and manga, they're going to continue their series. Finally, because the last one was Sailor Moon back in January, but on March 30th, they're going to talk about a current trend, which they refer to as 2.5D musicals and beyond, the adaptation of popular anime manga properties into stage shows. It's happened before. I mean, Rose of Versailles was popularly adapted into a stage show via Takarazuka, and that they've kept that ball rolling with other titles. I think Kenshin actually ended up in there. Prince of Tennis, Sailor Moon, Naruto, Token Ranbu. They've gotten the treatment, and they'll talk at length about this here. Dr. Akiko Sugawa Shimada, Dr. Zuhi Amithi Liu, and Dr. Mayuko Fujiwara will talk at length about this little phenomenon. And on that note, we talked at length about Miss Monet Kama Shiraishi, the star of Lady Maiko and Your Name. This week they announced she's been tapped to take the lead role in the stage adaptation of Spirited Away, coming soon to a Japanese theater near you. So that's kind of worth noting as well. And those are things to look out for. We'll put up links to those. And on that note, also, upcoming trailers. Let's talk for a couple seconds about this, because we saw trailers for the next live action Rurouni Kenshin, which will come out in April, and then I think a final movie in May or June. I think June, right, Mo? So we talked about that. Looked really interesting. And just coming back to Miss Kami Iraishi for a second, the star of the Kenshin movies, Takeru Saito, starred with the aforementioned Miss Monet in a live action drama recently, and fanboys and fangirls of those two love their chemistry so much. There's hopes that could translate into real life, and I think a lot of them are hoping. That's another story altogether, I'm sure. But just watching that trailer, there's a lot of links to stuff we've already talked about and seen through various other live actions and the film festival. And then the other trailer of note to have come out that caught our attention this week was the first trailer for the Way of the House Husband anime. And it's received some mixed reaction. Is this a case of high expectations and maybe unrealistically high expectations we're talking about here?
Probably high expectations, I'd say, on that one. So that one's coming out, they said, globally to Netflix April 8th. But the other thing is they had announced JC Staff was going to be doing the animation, stuff like that before. So you would have thought some people would have some things in check. But once they finally saw it, they weren't exactly pleased, to say the least. They felt it was like, oh, you just have I could read the manga and still get the gist. Like, it wasn't like it didn't feel like it was coming off the screen and stuff like that. And there was some of the thing of JC Staff was working quite a lot this season. I think they have over 6 series they have to work on. So there was a question of how much time were they able to give this series the love and care and stuff like that, because I guess a lot of people obviously care about this series and we're expecting more out of it.
It's a much beloved series, but it's also a slice of life. And that, I mean, part of me does understand, like, this, it's a very beloved series. There's a live action coming, but some people prefer animation. So I definitely do get it, but another part of me kind of is very cynical, and it's like, come on, look, you got color, you got voices, what more do you want?
Want a good adaptation, damn it.
I think it's going to be okay, but yeah, I can see, like, it's JC Staff, it's their workman-like quality and stuff like that. Sometimes they knock it out of the park, but I think they'll do all right with House Husband and stuff like that, and we'll see
Not
how it goes. But a lot of people were kind of calling back to what JC Staff did with another one Netflix streamed for them, and that was Backstreet Girls. So they were comparing it to that, and that was similar animation, to say the least, and stuff like that. And I thought it was still okay, and I
if
don't
the
mind being okay sometimes.
if the drawing quality is okay, then I don't think every anime needs that Sakuga clean, every lip flap, animated, smooth pirouettes of every hair strand. Like, it could be, it could still be fun. The music could be great, the voice acting could be great. Yeah, it could be a little bit choppy, but again, I don't think every series needs to be,
I think if
completely
you enjoyed
expensive.
the manga will enjoy the anime, I think, as well. But thinking back to people being very critical or very pointed with their comments and stuff, it made me think back to Attack on Titan final season switching from Wick to Mappa, and people were just looking for things to criticize and stuff like that. And it's kind of just taken on a life of its own sometimes in these type of arguments.
I adored Cromartie High School, and thinking back, like, I think that anime had like 5 frames of animation per episode or something. So
Now, it wasn't 5 frames. It was like 20.
but
I
loved
fucking
it.
love
Like,
Cromartie.
Okay.
Great.
yeah. So I think it's pretty soon. We'll find out in a couple weeks. So
3 things come to mind when I hear about this story, and I'll do my best to read up a little more and fully watch the trailer. But 3 things come to mind. 1, well, we had that talk last week about what happened to Caleb Cook and his handling of My Hero Academia. That's one thing that comes to mind. Although not exactly the same, but you know what I mean. Just along a similar feel, a similar sentiment, a similar mentality. Second thing, the last episodes of the EVA TV series. And the third thing is early anime production, Osamu Tezuka, and shortchanging. That mentality, that kind of, the original sin of the industry that was kind of outlined en masse in many different other places. But I remember reading about it in Pure Invention, but it's a story that's been documented plenty of times.
And I guess
those are the things that come to mind when I hear when you guys talk about it. Oh, go ahead, James.
I guess the other thing as well, we have that, but you think about shortchanging, and we were talking about this isn't exactly going to be traditional because Netflix has put the money in and stuff like that. So I guess that's why some people's expectations were up. It's like, okay, if you guys are going to hire these studios and put the money in, we're going to expect a little something more. So I feel like there's some of that in there too, right? After we've seen other productions and we've been wowed. And so I guess some people expected to be wowed, even though it was JC Staff and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, hey, maybe it's Sonic the Hedgehog too. But and this is more for a mental note for the future, just for a future episode, because we can't talk about it now. We've gone way over time. Netflix and CRTC. We got to talk about that. I know in the future episode.
I guess you'd want probably Jesse on there too. He has an encyclopedic knowledge, as we know.
And if failing that, if we don't do it, check out Zan in Canada in the very near future, because they've already touched on it, and I think they'll touch on it almost certainly in more detail. Okay. And finally, before we go tonight, our obligatory run through our reading and watching cues. And just for the sake of time, I've asked everybody if they want to do something no more than 2 titles to mention.
200
so
titles.
Let's see if we can keep the whole episode under 3 hours. Who wants to go? And you can you can defer if you want. Mo, you go first.
All right. I saw High Rise Invasion, and it was really good. Netflix did a good job. Show started off a little light, but then finished strong. Possible second season. We'll see how it goes.
They put in the money.
Oh yeah, they definitely put in the money.
Well, it's Netflix, right?
If that show does
Netflix,
if that show does as well as we think it will, like 7 Seas will be very, very happy because they will get a huge boost in their sales for the manga.
Dude,
I'm just wondering, is some of the manga out of stock or out of print? Because I know they started that a while ago, didn't they?
Yeah, I actually haven't been paying attention. I know before the end of last year, it was all still in print. I haven't kept up with it lately though, but I would imagine now that that show is out, people must have started buying the manga. And and why are you having trouble buying it, James?
No, I'm just wondering because I was thinking about what we were talking about with Seven Seas tiles, Kevin. So I was like, I wonder if anyone will be able to buy it after their WoW, just like Mo and stuff like that. But hopefully, once July happens and they switch over to Random Penguin House for distribution, they can get some of those mangas that have had some anime or successful anime and give them a little bit of a boost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Mo?
Making my way through Violent Evergarden as well. That's pretty
Oh
good.
yeah, that's right. You did mention
Oh.
How was that?
I don't know, man. I'm liking it more and more with every passing episode. I don't know why, but I'm
I
very much
hate to
enjoying it.
I hate to tell you, Mo. So I was watching that recently. I finally got to watching the discs, and my mind is blowing because I was watching that with people for their Netflix. We were doing a joint viewing of that. The thing on the Funimation disc is actually basically ripped straight from the Netflix thing. Like the subtitles, everything is the same. It's not even the same style that they use for Funimation. It's just mind-boggling. I've never seen this before, and it just cements what I said before that it was like I don't know why they went the lazy route on that because it's such a great show and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
because they
Okay.
have more things that weren't on the Netflix thing. You know how they go back and touch it up and stuff. They did that for Violet Evergarden, but I hope you enjoyed it and stuff like that because it was fantastic and stuff like that. And it would have been nice to maybe go over the subtitles just a bit because I'm sure they were under the time crunch like they always are.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mo. I will say just before we move, two things come to mind as Moa kind of talked there. Netflix getting into the anime industry, is it the repentance of the original sin or a selling of souls to the devil? Don't answer that. We're gonna talk. We may talk about that in the future, but just a thought. Okay, who wants to go next?
Oh, just a quick aside, James. Yep, some of the high-res animation volumes are becoming out of stock.
Someone told me that, so that's what I was thinking of, and that's why I was asking.
Okay. Okay. Who wants to go next? No one has anything else that they want to talk about in their queue?
I'll go next.
Okay. Okay, Kevin. Two titles.
So I'm approaching the end of Honey and Clover. I'm now
Oh,
at
that.
volume 7 or 8. I'm at volume 7.
Oh, how has that
Man, it's such a dense read at times. Like people
That's why
were
it's
really,
interesting. Did you watch the anime, Kevin? Because it feels different between reading and watching. Because it's, as you said, it feels very dense. It feels like I'm really trying to grab everything. There's so much happening in every word bubble and
yeah.
every scene.
I never got around to watching the anime. I purchased it, never opened them, and then decided to cash out on those when they were out of print. Because I was like, you know what, I'm
From
just never gonna.
Discotheque.
Yeah, when that license got announced, I was like, yep, it's time. And
But no,
then,
it's still a great read. So I hope you enjoy that one.
oh, I love it. I love it. It's like,
And there's one thing just to point out on Honey and Clover from the creator biz. We found out a week ago from Dempa. They
yes,
tweeted out and announced that the one we've been wondering from that creator from her March Comes In Like the Lion, that's going to come to North American English shores next year in 2022, they said. And it is a long series, but it's going to be worth the wait. But it's such a different series than Honey and Clover talking about shogi and stuff like that
yeah.
compared to talking about art school.
We can only
Mhm.
assume that Viz didn't think it was worth the risk because it never had an anime. And I imagine Honey Clover
It did
didn't.
actually have an anime, remember? It
Yeah,
did have
it
an
does
anime.
now. Well, it took a long time for that anime adaptation to happen, but I I think it's safe to assume that Honey and Clover didn't do as well for Viz as we would like it to have been, or maybe to their liking, because they did not license March Comes In on the Lion, despite its critical acclaim. And even with the anime out, they still didn't do it. So to them, it was probably too risky, especially now that shoujo manga just doesn't sell as well as it used to by and large. Like they like you look at the shoujo beat line for Viz, they don't put out as many shoujo titles as they used to.
It's weird. I think I see more shoujo titles from Kodansha than I do from Viz and stuff like that. And I can probably count on my hand how many shoujo beat ones we've heard in the last few years and stuff like that. And even some of the stuff from Kodansha, it feels like it's more digital than physical, right?
Yes, it's definitely more
Mhm.
digital now for Kodansha, especially for the shoujo manga. There's definitely not as much coming out physically. I know LDK is probably doing very badly now, so I think they started to omnibus that release, for example. But back to Honey and Clover, it's definitely like it became increasingly more relatable to me as the manga went along, because you have Yuta Takamoto, trying to figure out what he wants to do in life, and he feels like he's stuck, and you have all these unrequited loves going around, and the frustrations of trying to like finish university and wondering, what you really want to do in life. Yeah, that stuff hit hard with me, I gotta say.
Oh.
It and I have to really commend Chika Umino in her love for like design and fashion and art, because lots of different chapters in regards to like little bits of clothing and fashion that I thought were pretty funny. Like there's one extra chapter where Mayama, I always don't remember the first names because they usually go by their last names in Honey and Clover, but he worked at a design firm at one point, and like you get introduced to some of his colleagues, and there's a special chapter about one of his male colleagues who is being dressed by one of the female coworkers as a joke, and he would wear all these outrageous things, but because he's a tall guy and good and he has good proportions, he would always pull off anything that he wore, no matter how silly it looked. And I thought that was a pretty
Yeah,
funny
that was a
chapter.
good one. Yeah.
Mhm.
And earlier on, also Hagu walks by a department store and she sees a pair of Mew Mew mules. Sorry, a pair of mules by like this high fashion brand called Mew Mew, and Morita notices this, and he actually went and bought those for her after he got paid for one of his random ass jobs that he does. So just little nods like that, I thought they were pretty nice. Like I was like, yep, this woman loves her fashion for sure.
No, it comes through in that one. And Honey and Clover is definitely a timeless one. So you can read it back
Yeah.
then, you can read it now, same for the anime, and you're still going to relate to it and love it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm hitting the end. I'm hitting the end for that one, so I'm looking forward to it. On the queue for what's next, because I know that was Mike telling me to hurry up. Despite still needing to read JoJo, I might actually dip into Detroit Middle City, because that seems like that will be next on the group read.
Do you need any volumes? Because I have the full series in behind me right now, and that's a fun one.
I'm good, James. I have it all shrink wrapped.
Well, mine
Okay,
unfortunately are not shrink wrapped, so they're not protected. So
James, your turn.
uh,
Untitled, James.
No, like they actually were shrink wrapped by Viz when they put them out, in case people were wondering.
oh, man. You can always get the anime from Sentai, but they were
Yeah.
both good. How about Jeff? Let Jeff have a word here.
I think on me, thankfully, Dr. Stone is starting to creep out as far as the dub release of Stone Wars, which is the second season. I did find out that the reason for the delay was actually the storms in Texas. I completely forgot that Funimation is based in Texas.
Oh
So
yeah.
when I remembered that, I was a little bit less annoyed that there was a delay in my dubs. I'm like, oh, okay, you can take all the time you need.
But it's weird
So
because they've had dubs, they've been doing it in Texas, but because they've gotten so big and had to get so many people, they've been doing them outside of Texas as well. Because I heard a recent one they're doing at what was it? The old one that Genion used to use. They did Capcom games and Helsing and stuff like that. Oh, Now I forget their name. It's escaping me. Jonathan Klein's New Generation Pictures.
Yeah, so
Ah,
still a great show. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of it. And my number two would probably be I think it's an older live action anime from probably 8 years ago called Parks and Rec. It's pretty funny so far. I think
What about Frasier?
it's a little bit annoying that it only has the one opening. Not even a lyrical opening. I prefer my songs to have lyrics or my openings to have lyrics. But yeah, pretty good arc so far.
James,
I'm trying to think
that's a good
how
one.
long Parks and Recs went because yeah, it was a great one, wasn't it? When NBC had it. Oh.
Go ahead, James.
Okay, so I had the one that I told you about, Mike, and that's the only one I'll mention. It actually keys into what we talked about the previous episode because Caleb Cook actually translated this manga, and that is The Girl Without a Face. It's one volume, so it'll be easy on the pocketbook for everyone to get and collect. And basically, it's about obviously this girl without a face and her boyfriend and their relationship, and obviously, this is because this boy is human, and then his girlfriend is a yokai, and all the people in their neighborhood are a yokai. And basically, she has no face because she's Nopera Bo, which is a yokai, which is a human without a face. And so that is where you're kind of going down like dark roads, stuff like that. And you see a person, you're like, oh, good, I see a person. They turn around, no face. You're like, oh shit, but luckily, there's nothing scary in this. It's a very slice of life and nice romantic comedy with this boyfriend and his girlfriend without a face. And it's only one volume because supposedly this creator, it started out on Twitter in 2019 and went for about a year before they collected it.
Oh, it's my turn.
Yep, your turn.
Okay. I'll try to be quick, but I do want to mention both the titles. That is one's on my queue still, and the other will be leaving it shortly. The one that's leaving, I finished watching the anime version of Great Passage just an hour ago or just an hour before we started taping. So that's on Amazon Prime. That's a Discotek release, worth the watch, but it is subtle, so it's probably, I'd say, for an older crowd. And I know some of its most protective fans will say it's probably one of the better ones most people don't know of. But, and this is of note to me, or of note to past discussions we've had. Remember, this was the Great Passage was originally a live action movie, and then it was made into an anime. And that's the order I've seen these two. We talk a lot about anime being made into live action. How about a live action being made into an anime? What's the difference there? What's the difference in how the viewer ends up seeing essentially the same plots, same events play out differently from live action to anime, not anime to live action? And it made me reflect about the subtle differences in the presentation, or maybe not so subtle differences in the presentations. Because for the first time, it made me realize how exaggerated anime can be sometimes with people's dialogues and facial expressions and reactions and what have you. Because obviously you kind of downplay it in a live action movie, but you have to kind of exaggerate it, I think. And people can tell me I'm a little off on this thinking. You have to exaggerate a little bit for the purpose of anime. And it's worth noting, remember, the source material for this was a novel. And the novel is actually available on the Kindle store for 99 cents right now. So there's a recommendation right there. And it's a 2016 anime. The movie was 2014, I believe, or 2017 anime. One thing that caught my attention on this is it used, by and large, the same animation style throughout, but it used different techniques and camera angles, if you want to use it, sweeping shots within that same style. And that's something that grabbed my attention while watching it. So if you have a Amazon Prime account, give this a watch. It's only 11 episodes, not much of a commitment, and I think you'll like it. Or if you're into the more subtle stories, and this is more of just this is more just a life story, a slice of life story, worth the watch. The other one is, and this is probably going to help me get a little bit more into present time, Demon Slayer, because I've started watching the anime. I'm 10 episodes into that. Really enjoyed it, I have to say. And just for reference, I'm alternating between sub and dub. So I'm watching the odd number episodes in Japanese, the even number episodes in English.
That's neat.
Just to see the subtle differences. Mo,
I did the exact same thing for High Rise. I watched the first few episodes in English and then switched over to Japanese and kind of rotated back and forth. It's interesting.
I think after all this discussion on the sub and dub debate we've had in the recent months, although maybe I started even doing it before, I'm just to understand the little nuances and just to see what the interpretations are of the characters in their English and Japanese language forms. I'm getting into that habit of alternating between the two now these days.
And
So
that
I guess
think
I'm now
was the greatest gift that happened at the start of the DVD era, as we talked about, that we could alternate between both. And that's a big feature we forget, because I love that fact that we can go between episodes and go between the different performances and stuff like that. And I've usually found enjoyment in both. Now, sometimes it can fall flat, but you never know.
Yeah, it could fall flat. You're right. And one last thing. One of you guys referred to a character as a whiny bitch. Who was that last time?
Say what? Who said what now?
I think in the... Who?
It was Zenitsu.
Zenitsu?
So is Kevin's point right on the mark there then?
Wait, I don't... Zenitsu, recap for me.
The blonde-haired kid who like always harasses.
Oh yeah. Who's constantly... Yeah. Okay. Well, we haven't really met him yet, but it's getting there. Although that other character whose name I forgot, Yoshiro or something, is right up there too.
Is he the guy with like the mohawk kind of hair?
No, he's the guy with the demon doctor, whose name I forgot right now.
Oh, him.
Yeah, names I forget right now, but I remember who's who.
Yeah, he's pretty abrasive too, but you don't see him too much.
Well, that's I don't doubt that after the way those episodes went.
He'll be back, but you don't. See
I don't doubt that either. But to end off on the topic of animation styles once again, I like that they use different animation styles here, how they meld together the more traditional animation styles with the CG and make it look so natural in the same picture.
And I think it's the power of UFO table and stuff like that, because
it's
you can see what they've learned from Fate and many other projects, right?
Yeah, it's just, but the way they do that, the way the visuals just come off, it is so impressive for a TV anime to this point. And I can start to see, and I'm starting to understand why it's so popular. Enough so that I'm giving serious consideration to buying the big box manga set when that comes out sometime in the fall. And Kevin, James, let's talk about how to get a good deal on that, because right now Amazon has that, I believe, for $226, give or take $1, and Indigo has it officially at its regular price, which will be $260 Canadian. But
oh, really?
With the plum plan, you can probably get discounts, and that's worth talking about.
The other thing is they might have a sale on box sets. They sometimes do.
So, and we have until early October on that.
So you have a long time to think about it. So I wouldn't worry.
Oh, those manga sales have been pretty dry as of late. I
haven't noticed anything. I haven't been able to act on anything. I do get the emails.
I was gonna let you know that, Kevin. I'm checking week to week, but they kind of flipped the pattern and stuff like that, because they did different publisher sales last year, probably starting in August, and then August, September, October. But they didn't do that. They did just a general manga buy two get the third 3 in August.
Back
So
in August,
now
yeah.
I'm not sure if it's going to happen in March or not because they did that the previous Marches every other year before that. So they've kind of flipped the script. We'll see when the next sale happens, right? That's all you
Like,
can
Right.
do.
because it used to
Anyway,
be like for at least 2 or 3 weeks for that sale for March, but now my guess is that they may only do it for a week.
we'll find out. We'll find out. The thing is, I have a decision to make to apply for the Plum Plus program because there's 8,500 Plum points at stake at the end of the month
You
if I
need
don't
to
do it.
spend at least a good $200-300 for a whole year, for that 12-month duration to justify the cost of that card.
And that's
Yeah,
why
I got.
that could do it. And the box set, a manga box set like that, could do it.
And if you get the discounts and all that, it works itself. But I guess if you buy a certain amount, I'm not sure if Kevin got the email too, but they sent me an email. I have to decide if I want to go into this thing where I guess you're an insider and you can give them suggestions about the Plum plan or something like that.
Oh, I did get that, yeah.
But I'm not sure if they want our suggestions, Kevin, because if you look at our yearly data, it's like we've probably only been buying manga
Yep.
and like
Yeah, well,
novels and God knows what else.
I buy the odd thing too myself, though. So anyway, so my focus, I guess, anime wise, over the next little while, will probably be to at least complete the Demon Slayer series.
Oh, let me know when you get closer to the end, because I need to watch the last 5 episodes still.
Okay,
I wouldn't mind a
It,
joint viewing of that somehow.
we'll figure. I'm sure we can figure something out.
And then
Yeah.
you guys can go to the movie whenever that comes over.
Well,
I'm
yeah,
sure.
whatever. Oh, yeah. Well, that's another story altogether, and I know we can save that for a future episode too, because
We'll have to
plenty to
have
go.
some very big masks and everything else on to
Well, we
protect
have a
ourselves when
lot
we
of things.
go.
There's no shortage. Sometimes I feared earlier. Remember a few months ago, I feared we would have a shortage of stuff to talk about. No shortage. I don't see it anymore. We'll be fine. We all have plenty of things to talk about. But I think we're all tapped out for tonight.
Oh, I don't know about that.
I am.
Well, let's put it this way, Mike. If some people wish to have skipped over the first part because they felt it was a little too serious, we gave them enough in the second part to sate them over.
Yeah, they did. I think so. Made it up
Oh,
pretty
I
quickly.
have a story that I'll tell you guys once we stop recording.
Okay, well, yeah. But for everyone listening, well, that's the power of seeing the show live. That's all we got for this evening. Once again, a quick reminder where you can reach us, since we didn't mention it at the beginning of the show. Email animeroundtable@gmail.com, Twitter and Instagram @animeroundtable. Animeroundtable.com is our website for show notes and past episodes. Also, don't forget to leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts if possible, because reviews, and especially good reviews, will help our chances to possibly be exposed to other people who might listen to this show. This is where Kevin now says
5 stars.
thank
Period.
you. We typically do episodes every other week. Once in a while, we'll do something consecutive. Maybe we should do weeklies a little bit more. But subscribe to us wherever you get your stuff so you can be reminded whenever something new has dropped in the feed. So until next time, thanks for listening. Good night from Toronto. Join us again for another edition of the Anime Roundtable. How many times did we say for better or worse? I think we know our drinking game this week.
I don't
Take a
think I
shot.
said that, did I? Oh, well.